I'll ask Mr. Makasa Mukula from the Zambia Development Agency to lead us in prayer as we begin our program this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to kindly request you all to stand as we speak to our Reverend God and Creator. Thank you very much. Our eyes are closed and our heads are bowed, and we are speaking to Jehovah Yahweh, creator of the heavens and the earth, he who that is sovereign and created each one of us standing before him this morning. Lord, with contrite hearts we come to you to seek your mercy and compassion and to seek your presence, Lord, that you may grace this occasion, Father. Lord, we just want to invite you, Lord, to lead us, Lord, that, Lord, whatever we are going to discuss and embark upon this morning, you shall grace it, and that your name will be glorified when everything is said and done. Lord, we hope to discuss big business ideas, Lord. Some people, Lord, have come here to seek investment opportunities and big business opportunities, Lord. But Lord, because we depend upon you, because you're an able God, these aspirations will be met, Lord. And so, Lord, we want to anchor all these wishes and desires and aspirations to you, Lord, so that everything that we seek, Lord, will be granted, Lord. And so, Lord, we anchor this prayer in the mighty and name of Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Let everybody say amen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makasa Mukula from the Zambia Development Agency, leading us in the grace this morning at the Mulungushi International Conference Center. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Zambia Development Agency and the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry to this Zambia Investment Conference. Let me recognize the presence of the Honorable Deputy Minister, Mr. Raymond Mbula, the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Mrs. Kayula Siame, the Board Chairperson, Ms. Mary Ngube from the Zambia Development Agency, the Vice Chairperson, Mr. Don Stacey, the Acting Director General, Mr. Simoawa Jonathan. May I simply say, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, captains of industries, visiting delegates, welcome to this international conference where we are looking at energy and climate change. Today, as we look at investment and the opportunities that are available in Zambia, we want to focus on investing in renewable energy for economic growth and a cleaner environment. I think this is very key for the development of the country, and we have seen massive growth in many areas, infrastructure, and many other sectors of the economy. But we still see a challenge in terms of energy. So those are the things that we'll be discussing this morning to see what opportunities are available and how we can turn around this situation to make this country one of the greatest countries in Africa. Of course, we've seen so many good reports about Zambia and how it's a very good destination to invest your money and get good return on your money. So as we hear the speakers, we'll be able to interact with them and also learn about how we can get involved. May I call upon the chairperson of the Zambia Development Agency, Ms. Mary Ngube, to give her welcome remarks to this investment conference.
Honorable Deputy Minister for Commerce and Trade and Industry, Mr. Raymond Mbulu, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Mrs. Kayula Siame, distinguished international and local delegates to the African Development Bank annual meeting, distinguished invited guests, and may I simply say, all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I am privileged to welcome you to this half-day event the Zambia Investment Forum, whose theme is investing in renewable energy for economic growth, job creation, and a cleaner environment. This theme resonates with that for this year's Africa Development Bank annual meeting, which is energy and climate change. Zambia and the surrounding region has been experiencing power challenges of varying severity, caused in part by drought and inadequate water in our hydro energy generation reservoirs. This, coupled with the low commodity prices on the international market, has had a significant negative effect on the macroeconomic indicators of our economies. The growth in our population, the growth in our manufacturing, mining, agriculture, agro-processing, and other sectors requires energy. As we scale up industrialization of Africa, we will require significant power resources for sustainability. We have known this for many years, and we can attest to many national plans that have pointed to this fact in our own countries. This is not a new dialogue that we are having today. It is only different in that we are not talking about power challenges that our countries may face in the future, but we are talking about how to get ourselves out of the power crisis that many of our countries now find themselves in. We need this power challenge resolved like yesterday. This is a call for us to move from discussions to action, not only on energy and climate change, but on many other developmental issues that our countries and Africa needs to resolve. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, just as we all know that for survival and sustainability, Africa must diversify from dependence on export of primary commodities and produce to value addition, it is now apparent that we must also diversify our energy sources in order to ensure uninterrupted availability and supply of power for sustainable economies. You will all agree with me that in Africa, one job can support more than 30 people. Job creation is an imperative for both government and the private sector now. The African continent has a very large youthful population. Our youth need jobs. We can assure jobs for our people by expanding our economies, encouraging and promoting education in science and mathematics for research and development, and providing leadership for action. It is time for us to act. Finally, I would like to thank the African Development Bank for choosing Zambia for its 2016 annual meeting. I would also like to thank the Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry and the Zambia Development Agency for organizing this investment forum. I again welcome you all and wish you all a fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Ms. Mary Nue giving her welcome remarks to this investment forum. I now wish to call upon the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Mrs. Kayula Siame, to come and give a statement, and also call upon the Minister to give the opening speech.
The Honourable Deputy Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Honourable Raymond Mpundu, the Chairperson of the Zambia Development Board, the Vice Chair, Directors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to this key event that we're having today regarding investment opportunities in relation to investment climate issues. Honourable Minister, I think as you may be aware, when we opened this conference, one of the things that was talked about was the high 5 priority areas. And I think this investment forum that we're having this morning is really timely in that it looks at issues of investment climate that will not only affect Africa, but affect Zambia. But in particular, it provides us with an opportunity to look at how those challenges that we are facing us can be turned into opportunities. So with these few remarks, I would like to now call upon the Honourable Deputy Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry to deliver the official opening speech. Thank you.
Senior government officials present, representatives from the African Development Bank, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and representatives of international organizations, representatives of investment agencies, representatives of public and private sector organizations, distinguished speakers, and sponsors of the Investment Forum, distinguished invited guests, friends from the media. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to be invited to officiate at this important Zambia Investment Forum being held on the margins of the 51st African Development Bank annual meeting. I am particularly delighted to note that the theme for this investment forum, which is investing in renewable energy for economic growth, job creation, and a cleaner environment, has taken cognizance of the importance of moderating the impact of climate change. It is for this reason that I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the African Development Bank for one of the bank's high 5 priority areas, namely to light up and power Africa. For this, I say, well done. Your Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Investment Forum is aimed at showcasing Zambia's investment opportunities in various sectors of the economy and also offers an excellent opportunity for networking between local and international players. This forum is a suitable platform for both emerging and established companies to interact with various financiers, business developers, and potential business partners. You may wish to agree with me that this forum could not have come at a better time than now, when the country's focus is on the diversification of the economy from the traditional mining sector into other sectors, which include energy, agriculture, tourism, and information, communication and technology, among others. Your Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, as you may be aware, Zambia is a multi-party democracy that provides a liberalized economy in a strife-free, multicultural society that presents a stable investment climate, thereby making it a new frontier for investments, not only in Africa, but the world at large. This is coupled with preferential market access through the COMESA, SADC, ESC tripartite window, which has a combined population of over 600 million people with a combined GDP of 1.3 trillion United States dollars, presenting a huge market for Zambia's products and produce. Your Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, government has continued to implement positive and forward-looking investment and economic policies aimed at fostering economic development and improving the social welfare of the Zambian people. I wish to mention that the Patriotic Front government remains committed to creating an enabling environment aimed at attracting foreign direct investment and stimulating local investments as well. Additionally, my government has continued to pursue the implementation of the private sector development initiatives that promote and facilitate the development of a competitive private sector. For example, starting a business in Zambia takes just 1 day. This is attributable to the creation of the one-stop shop for company registration, where you have the National Pension Scheme Authority, NAPSA subscription, and payment of the Zambia Revenue Authority at the same time. In 2011, Zambia is the business startup by eliminating the minimum paid up capital requirement. And recently, the threshold was raised for VAT registration. Further, the Business Regulatory Review Bill, recently passed in Parliament, has set a stage for greater dialogue between government and businesses in the formulation of policy. This will make the licensing regime simpler, more transparent, and focused on legitimate regulatory purposes. The result of this will be that investors will face a whole new situation, more favorable and less bureaucratic, marked by transparency and speed in carrying out fiscal procedures. Your Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, as a result of our business environment reforms, Zambia is now ranked 80th in Africa, 5th in SADC, and 4th in COMESA in terms of the ease of doing business. Furthermore, Zambia is ranked the 80th most competitive country in Africa and on the Global Competitive Index. Recently, Zambia was ranked 7th by Forbes as the best country for doing business among 54 African countries. With the favorable rankings that I have just given, you will agree with me that Zambia is indeed one of the best destinations for investment. In that regard, I wish to urge you all to take advantage of this favorable investment climate and invest in Zambia. We have several investment opportunities in mining, agriculture, energy, tourism, infrastructure, ICT, and value addition in manufacturing. Let me also remind you that my government places a lot of importance in fostering joint venture partnerships between local and foreign-owned companies. I implore upon you to take advantage of this grand opportunity to identify suitable partners for mutual benefit. Your Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, as you will observe, the selection and focus of the thematic areas for this forum are based on the opportunities and possible interventions to allow for sustained economic development, and these are: 1, climate change, impact on Africa, measures to redress the situation, role of government, and 2, alternative energy solutions, investing in renewable energy. What are the immediate measures to reduce the energy gap? I'm therefore confident that you'll find these thematic areas stimulating, and this will in turn motivate you to invest in our country, Zambia. In conclusion, I wish to urge local and foreign investors to take advantage of Zambia's conducive investment environment by choosing to invest in various sectors of the economy, particularly the energy sector. All of us have a role to play, and this audience is no exception. The potential for strengthened investment and economic ties amongst African countries can be enhanced so as to contribute tremendously to the growth and development goals of our continent. With these remarks, it is my singular honor and privilege to declare the Investment Forum officially open. I thank you and may God bless you.
That was a speech by Mr. Raymond Mpundu, Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry. May we give him another round of applause. Now, to show you what the Minister was talking about, the Deputy Minister, we have a video which will show you the opportunities available. It's a short video, so please take a listen.
Zambia. Land-linked at the heart of Southern Africa, one of the continent's fastest growing economies and the face of the new emerging Africa. With its name derived from the mighty Zambezi River, Zambia, home to the mighty Victoria Falls, is undisputedly a haven of peace-loving and friendly people, a pleasant climate, and vast investment opportunities. Spanning over a landmass of 752,612 square kilometers, this jewel is a guarantee of Africa's most favorable investment destination, sitting on abundant natural resources. With just over 13 million inhabitants, the country is one of the most attractive investment locations in sub-Saharan Africa. Zambia's trade and investment opportunities begins with its centrality, surrounded by 8 countries and positioned uniquely with easy access to all the capitals on a good road network, 3 international airports, and close proximity to the larger South African market. Zambia's stable economic outlook is affirmed by steady investment in mining, service delivery, public investment, and fairly strong macroeconomic policies. The positive growth stems from economic liberalization and a diversification program that has brought about competitiveness and a vibrant industrial base attracting high levels of foreign direct investment, FDI. The financial sector of the country is backed by strong international and local banks, reputable insurance brokers and companies, a stable local currency, trading favorably alongside major global currencies, and a general decline in annual inflation rates. This is focused towards accelerating private sector confidence, increasing productivity, capacity, and ability to penetrate larger markets. The mining and quarrying sector in Zambia accounts for 86% of the country's foreign direct investment and 80% of exports. Mining is the dominant sector in the Zambian economy. Massive investments in mining has seen expansion in lucrative copper and cobalt mines, gemstone and abundant mineral resources on the copper belt and northwestern provinces, and generally new discoveries in other parts of the country. Mining and quarrying in Zambia has expanded by 4.1% since 2013, with copper output rising to 12.3%, coal production increasing from 148,768 tons to 121,024 tons. Growth conditions for mining in Zambia are largely positive and calls for further private investment, particularly in the underexploited gemstone sector. Agriculture, fisheries and livestock are now priority sectors in the Zambian economy. Agriculture has seen massive growth in mechanization, promotion of smallholder and commercial farmers. Zambia has identified agriculture as one of the economic drivers in the medium to long term, as essential to rural and urban livelihoods, employment creation, and a major source of income. The climate and topography in the country are generally suited for agriculture. 40% of the region's fresh water and underground water is also found in Zambia. This is now fostering investment in irrigation, modern agricultural practices, and conservation farming aimed at fighting the threatening climate change. Although maize production has enjoyed dominance, the Zambian government has introduced policies that encourage diversification in high-value export crops. The fisheries and livestock sectors have equally seen policy shift that encourages new breeding stocks and a variety of local consumption and export markets. Food security and productivity is further being encouraged at a growing annual agriculture expo that brings together local and international exhibitors to showcase latest trends in farming and mechanization. The Agritech Expo attracts over 10,000 attendees from within and outside Zambia. The agriculture sector in Zambia offers a fresh ground of investment to local and foreign investors. Connected to agriculture is manufacturing, set to propel growth, diversification, and job creation, also identified in Zambia as a priority area for investment. Here lies a strong linkage to the abundant production of raw materials in mining, agriculture, and other areas into finished products. Value addition is key in the area of manufacturing. Even though Zambia has relied heavily on imported finished goods, the government is intent on providing incentives to promote locally manufactured and produced products, goods and services for the local and international markets. The construction industry plays an integral part in Zambia's economic development and has been a catalyst for growth in recent years. Private and public sector projects such as roads, residential and commercial properties have continued to be ongoing activity. As a result of this growth, cement production rose in recent years by 2.1% from 1,525,000 million metric tons to 1,557 million metric tons. Stimulating real estate development in Zambia is a major area of investment for both local and foreign investors. Zambia is currently undergoing a massive road infrastructure development, linking the country with the Link Zambia 8000, L400, and PAVE Zambia 2000 to connecting all provincial capitals and making the entire country, particularly the rural areas, more accessible to markets and investment. This is pushing communication and transport to an accelerated level of development. This brings communication sector into the picture, the vehicle through which transformation is transmitted. Broadcasting and information technology has rapidly advanced into 3G and 4G services in telephony and internet services, with radio and television services throughout the country. For a rapid, expanding economy like Zambia, the energy sector is key in ensuring growth is facilitated. Zambia has relied on hydropower from its pre- to post-independence existence. Reduction in hydropower supply in recent years due to climate change factors and rapid industrial and mining growth is now pushing Zambia to investing into new ways of power production such as solar energy, ethanol, and other power sources. Tourism in Zambia begins and ends with the warm-hearted and friendly people of this peace-loving nation. Tourism is also an important source of job creation, prosperity, and competitiveness. In tourism, Zambia offers you everything from adventure, wild safaris, and some of the finest cuisines and accommodation. It is here that you will see some of the finest attractions on the continent, the mighty Victoria Falls, a World Heritage Site and unforgettable wonder, known locally as the Mosi Otunya or the Smoke That Thunders. Breathtaking views and unexplored attractions make Zambia an ideal destination for investment. safari goers, thrill seekers, honeymooners, and families. The highest concentration of wild and over 740 bird species are found in Zambia. It is Africa's premier of wildlife resource. All this and so much more awaits you at this beautiful piece of Africa. With whatever you choose, visitor, friend, or investor, that will make your dreams for business and leisure a reality awaits you here in Zambia.
Beautiful images of our country. May we give a round of applause. I think it's not just enough to talk about Zambia, the real Africa. You need to see the pictures. We move on with our program, and I would like to ask our Deputy Minister and the team here on front to go down so that we move on to our first session. And I'll be calling upon the moderator, Mr. David Kalura, Coordinator, Interim Climate Change Secretariat, to lead the team. And we'll go right away into climate change, a reality or myth, impact on Africa, measures to redress the situation, role of government. We want to ensure that we catch up on time so that we make up for the time that we lost in the morning. So may we have our team to look at climate change, a reality or a myth, impact on Africa, measures to redress the situation. You can sit. You sit on. The rest of the team, we have Mr. Itonomea Ulatijini, World Bank Environmental Specialist. Our discussants, we have Ms. Charity Nalweya, Senior Inspector from ZEMA, Mr. Ephraim Shitima, Chief Natural Resources Management Officer, Ministry of Lands, Natural Resources, and Environment. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to the moderator to pick up the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me start with, of course, acknowledging the Deputy Minister's presence and the Permanent Secretary, the senior government officials, the Excellencies. It's an honor for me to moderate. My task is simple, is to moderate those who are discussing and put them in line, as it were. So we have Mr. Iretomiwa Iretunji. Now, forgive me for mispronouncing your name. We have Ms. Charity Nalweya Mundia and Mr. Shitima. Let me just start by saying that climate change in the Zambian context has had cost implications. And one of the most obvious one is the impact on the economy. We are aware that over a period of time, probably a period of 30 years, Zambia lost an estimated $13.8 billion in GDP loss. And other estimates also tell us that if we do not do anything, we are likely to lose another 4.3 billion every 10 years. So far, I think we are living with sort of realities and impacts on our economy particularly when we talk about renewable, energy in the energy sector. This is true in the agriculture. We can talk about many other sectors. Between 2014 and now, perhaps the numbers could be higher than what was originally estimated. Now, in terms of poverty levels and unemployment, we are also informed that impacts of climate change can put another 300,000 people below the poverty line. So those are just numbers that we have come to know about. So the panelists will obviously help us to understand this issue a little bit more. And let me straight away ask Mr. Iretomiwa to give us a presentation on this subject, to help us also understand whether climate change is it a scientific issue? Is it a myth? I think most people will tell you, and I remember being on radio and I was being told, actually the world is coming to an end. So I do hope that in his presentation he'll help us to understand whether the world indeed is coming to an end, whether we should do something about it or let nature take its course. So he has a homework. So Mr. Iretomiwa, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just permit me.
You can stand.
We'll stay right here to make my presentation. I have a PowerPoint which I'll be using to have this conversation. And precisely, I'm not going to try to sort of like present to you a paper, but rather let us have a conversation whereby we could think through the whole scientific and the non-scientific aspect of climate change so that we can probably see whether it's a reality or it's a myth. So before my starting up, I would like to once again acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Deputy Ministers and the ZDA who gave me the opportunity to be here, and every other members of the early panel that were sitting here earlier today. Like you've heard, my name is Iretomiwa Olatunji. I'm an environmental specialist with the World Bank with a climate resilience specialization. And, the presentation, the title said, is it a myth or a reality? I believe in this room today there are not any skeptics. I know there are skeptics out there about climate change. If anybody is here today, probably they are here because they know there's something called climate change and they really want to know what they need to do, when they need to be doing it, and how they need to be doing it. So my presentation said the impact on Africa. I will look at this from the lens of Africa, and I will take this down to the angle of Zambia. I'm a Nigerian, and one way or the other, I grew up in the city and partly out of the city. My grandmother happens to be an agriculturist who is a farmer who knew nothing about the science of farming, a subsistence farmer, growing cocoa in her village in the southwest of Nigeria. Now, one thing I remember very well growing up as days, in the weather and climate in Nigeria, there's usually what we call the August break, meaning that's the time when we have a break in the rainfall pattern from which starts in around May up to August. Then around after August, that's September, the rain starts all over again. But then I remember at the time, the August break pattern just changed. We have rain in August, then probably September there's no rain, then there's rain in October, or probably there's no rain. For me then, I never see this as something very significant. Now, as an undergraduate in agriculture, I remember having to take a course on climatology, and I remember then one of the things I used to say, okay, all these Muzungus have come again, they are trying to tell me, okay, there's climate change and everything. I never really believed it. But I went through my studies, then along the line, I found myself being a practicing farmer also. Then the reality began to dawn on me because I need to start looking at my pattern of when I need to practice agriculture. Then over the years, I started working in the development field where I happened to be an environmentalist and had to work on climate resilience. And I had to start dealing with people at the grassroots, at the community. These are purely rain-fed agriculture people who deal with subsistence farming. And they started telling their story about how they don't have rain or there's an onset of drought and everything. And I began to think, is this a myth or a reality? Now, many years ago, this is what people think a computer in a house will look like. This is how people were trying to figure out the technology. So you can imagine if they couldn't get it right more than a century ago, many decades ago, about how to build a computer and how to use a computer in the house. That means the science of climate change was something that must have been happening long ago, but then it was difficult for people to convey the reality to people. Now, this is Caprivi in 2009 in Zambia. Many of us have read about the story this year about the drought that was happening in Ethiopia. Many of us have heard about what was happening in Vietnam or Bangladesh on the rain. Now, most of them have been thinking, is this a one-off event or is it a reality? Many years ago, they were trying to forecast. But then the science at that time was not as strong as it used to be today. But today, we could see events changing and changing on and on. So this tells us that this is a reality living with us right now. Now, coming back home into Zambia, I'm using Zambia as an example. These are the changes in terms of the temperature. And it's telling us that we will likely have an increase in temperature. Last year, I was in the Western Province, in the plains. There is an ongoing project on Zambia called the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience. Now, I happen to be in an area called Sioma. This was at the middle of the growing and planting season. The rain came very early, and all of us who were Zambians know at the time last year, the rain suddenly ended. Much early in the communities, but we're having rain in Lusaka. Now, all the crops that were being grown in Sioma, all of them dried off. And even sorghum and millet, which are drought resistant because they were at the point of fruiting when the rain stopped, all of them were lost. So the district commissioner in this location was having an average of more than 500 to 1,000 people coming to his office every day looking for relief. So this is a trend that is happening in Zambia. This is what it's telling us about the different agroecological zone and the different sectors, meaning the 8 vulnerable sectors of Zambia that are vulnerable to the impact of climate change and are already feeling it. We could see it in the agriculture sector, we could see it in the natural resource sector, we could see it in the forestry, we could see it in the water, and we could see it in energy, where we've been talking about right now today. Interestingly, like I said, flooding, northwestern, western, southern, northern province, and river basins. All of these are facing a change in the trend of the yearly rate of return of flooding and the extreme drought, meaning that you have excess rain that you expect, and 2-3 months later, everywhere is dry. How do we make this happen? If this is a reality for us, if it is no more a myth, then we need to begin to rethink how we do the science of climate change or how we begin to do our development. Meaning that we need to look at 3 different interesting things. The nexus of infrastructure. All our infrastructure are getting vulnerable. I remember about 3-5 years ago, I was in Zambia, heading out of Zambia. I was at the airport when I saw the picture of the tsunami that happened. My colleague, the moderator, was mentioning about the impact on the economy. And I remember a few days ago, he was speaking to someone when he was talking about the impact of Hurricane Katrina, which came at a yearly early return in USA, where even there was a preparation, but the water that came in, the flood that came in, overflowed the levees, meaning we need to begin to rethink how we do our infrastructure planning. We need to rethink how we do our sustainable integrated approach of planning. And we need to begin to rethink about our information, because these are the 3 nexus that helps us to really know the impact of climate change. In order for us to do that, And in order for us to really be able to see what is the role of the government, how this impacts people, and how this needs to be addressed, we need to understand that we need to strengthen the coping capacity of the people at the lower level of the government. I mean, the reality is this: if we're in Lusaka, almost every one of us have an air conditioning in our house, we have an access to water, we have mostly almost all the natural resources or anything we need. But I'm telling you the truth, take 100 kilometers outside of Lusaka, then the reality will dawn on us. I mean, I had to do about nothing less than 6 hours drive last week in Western Province to some community. From the district, I have to do another 3 hours drive, and I could see what is the impact of climate change for these people, because they are the people who are the small-scale older enterprise who are driving the economy on the agriculture sector. It's a win-win, meaning the partners, the government, the private sector, and everybody involved have to work together. Are we going to get it right from the beginning? Maybe not. Are we going to stumble along the road? Yes. But then we have an opportunity if we realize that during the win-win situation, we can make things happen and we can make it work. The coping capacity today with climate change and variability has to be strengthened. And the ultimate goal is for the people and the overall economy in any country, especially in Africa, like we saw in the video, which has a lot of natural resources that it's endowed with, to be able to face the shocks of the long-term effects of climate change. What is the first way? The first way to get this happen and to get it on is to have a good system in any government, meaning there have to be a very strong institutional arrangement for multi-sectoral coordination and planning and development on climate change. The reality is this: most times the environmentalists will always say climate change belongs to us. But the reality is this: I'm an environmentalist and I will say to you, climate change is about development. It's about planning. It's multi-sectoral, meaning in any country, any sector that is vulnerable needs to be part of every decision and planning about climate change. And this has to be in such a way that it's strong and strengthening enough to have a convening power. Because if there's no convening power to be able to coordinate climate change, it's all going to be in mess. Then you have the environment people doing something, you have the agriculture people doing something different, you have the tourism sector doing something different, you have the infrastructure people doing something different. And because of lack of synergy and coordination, what you end up to see at the end of the day is that the overall impact, the overall development, the overall achievement doesn't show any significant change. From the bank side, from our perspective, we're thinking, how can you do this? We looked at the fact that there is a need for what we call an Africa Climate Business Plan. This is a plan that is looking to how government can engage with itself, engage with partners, engage with donors, engage with different stakeholders about climate change. Meaning that you have to take this beyond just the whole context of what the COP is saying, what the COP has made happen, but to see how the private sector and everybody works together. And in doing that, you have to look at strengthening resilience. You have to look at natural capital, you have to look at physical capital, and you have to look at human and social capital. These are the sectors that have been impacted. Beyond that, the energy sector and the enabling environment for resilience in the community. What does it take to make resilience available for everybody? This plan looks at the different initiatives that can take place and what happens if you don't look at it in a holistic manner. Meaning that failure to include climate change in any development plan means that you are not mainstreaming, you are not strengthening your development in such a way that it can withstand the impact and vulnerability of climate change. Meaning that whatever investment, whatever amount of money, whatever planning, whatever science you put into it, at the end of the day, over a period of 5-10 years, one-off event can come and wipe off everything. So meaning it's not just about response alone, it's also about preparedness. Adequate integration of climate risk requires a paradigm shift. That means we have to think about development in a different dimension. It doesn't have to be the normal development again. It has to be a development that thinks about the fact that there is a risk we are facing every day. The risk is a reality. It's going to live with us, and we have an option to either live with the risk, move away from the risk, or to build a system whereby we can cope with the risk. If we don't do that, then we are in a real problem. We need information, meaning that if we go back to the early information days, we can't live with the ancient information again. We have to live with an information that is evolving, because the changes we're dealing with are evolving on a daily and a regular basis. The futures. Create an option and data knowledge on how to make this happen. Develop guidelines for climate resilience. That means in the planning in the country, you need to look at the investment planning in such a way that we're able to look at a forward long-term in an approach. We have to look at partners in each country, identify the partners you need to work with from different set of actors, African Development Bank, the World Bank, SADC, COMESA, name them. It's going to require financing, and that is why I would like to say climate change is not just about the science alone. It's actually about the finance that goes with the science. I won't go through all this. This is looking at the whole setup of what I mentioned about the natural capital, the enabling resilience, and the strengthening resilience. So how do we make it happen? These are some of the areas of components we think from the bank side it's important for any country to look like. These are the areas we looked across the whole continent of Africa that are impacted by climate change, meaning climate smart agriculture, areas like the Niger Basin, the Lake Chad, the Zambezi, which is right within here in Zambia, Lake Victoria, Resilient Landscape Initiative. These are all initiatives that the bank has looked at the niche sectors and collaborative sectors to make sure we are doing a synergistic work and see how all of these resonate with issues in countries: hydropower, transport, solar, geothermal, etc. Now, the financing. There is a gap. Every one of us know out there the outcome of the COP21 was about having a holistic financing mechanism. The GCF, the Green Climate Fund, is out there. Every one of us is talking about it. But I always say to people, the funding may be there, but if you don't have a good plan in-house, if you don't have a good development planning, if you don't have a long-term outlook, you might not be able to make a case to get access to these resources. Because what any donor is looking for is anybody that is able to do a development that is going to bring real change, a paradigm shift. So in my conclusion and next steps, which is what the African Climate Business Plan is saying, that this has to be a bottom-up assessment approach. It doesn't have to be a top-bottom again. This is what we've been doing many years ago. We do the planning in the Ministry of Planning and Development. We do the talk in the Ministry of Finance. We push it down to the line ministries, and they try to cascade it down. Now, this is where we need to reverse the change. Listen to the people who are living in the borders of the impact of climate change at the community level. It might look as if they don't have any science, but because of the historical knowledge they have, because of the historical understanding they have about the impact of climate change and the coping mechanism, they are able to inform development planning at the world level, at the district level, which can translate into provincial level planning, and which can also feed into national planning at the government, at the higher level, at the national level. Meaning that we need to have that paradigm shift, like I'm saying again. All these plans have to be able to feed into the strategic thinking of donors. It doesn't have to be the World Bank alone. African Development Bank, just like they brought us all here together. In conclusion, I would like to say the focus in Zambia. Looking at all those components I mentioned about, I took a look. Almost every one of them have affected Zambia, excluding just about 3 or 4, which is the Niger Basin, where the Zambia is not located, or the Lake Chad Basin, or the coastal area. But however, if we look at all these different plant components, we could see that these resonate with any part of Africa, meaning that any part of Africa, any country in Africa can look at themselves and say, yes, this affects me, and if this is affecting me, there is an action that I need and I can take. So, if this resonates with the people of Zambia, does it resonate with the policymakers? How can and what can be done? Two things can be done. Financing, which already is existing, and new ones are happening. And the last part is there's expertise out there. There's a wealth of knowledge out there. It's not about a myth again. It's not about trying to prove to anybody. It's about the fact that if we look at the margins of the people who are being impacted, it is a reality. So then what is our goal? The goal we all have is to see how we can move from where we are standing in right now and how we can move forward and how we can live sustainable in the near future with a paradigm thinking of an integrated landscape program wherein every government plan is integrated together, and this can cascade from the top to the bottom and from the bottom feeding into the whole initiative. So without much ado, I would say, let's think about these questions, let's think about this approach, and let's know for a reality that climate change is going to be with us for a while. It's just like we have the whole issues of HIV/AIDS. When it started up, many people didn't believe the whole story. Many people thought it's a myth. But then over years, we came to the reality that it's living with us. But then what good thing is this, over years, we've been able not only to adapt, but we're moving towards a trend whereby a cure is coming to to HIV. Now, if it could happen with HIV, I believe we can do that same thing with climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Retomiwa, for that presentation. I think you have brought up a number of issues that, of course, requires some perhaps further reflection by our members of the panel. We'll take a few minutes to allow the panelists to react to the presentation or to make some comments. And then I'll request the audience in the last, let's say, 15 minutes to also ask questions and to reflect on the discussion. So let me bring in our Charity to say a few words. What are some of these the challenges that in African countries are facing in general, and in Zambia in particular, with regards to climate change?
Thank you, moderator. I think that we can all identify with the challenges and impacts of climate change that African countries are facing, and that's actually the reason that brings all of us here, because we have all been impacted by climate change, and we are coming here to put our heads together to come up with solutions on how we can resolve these challenges. And let me also say that, if you talk to perhaps even my grandfather in the village is well able to explain the impacts that climate change has had on them in their own language, in his own language, of course, and in his own words. So in short, what I'm trying to say is that climate change is a reality. The impacts are a reality, and we are feeling them as Africa and as African countries. And of course, what comes to mind, and we have heard over and over again in the various sessions, challenges like droughts, and this comes home to a lot of us, especially Zambians. Last year, of course, we had a very, we had a drought situation, and this impacted directly on reduced water levels and impacted directly, of course, on energy production. And this led to what we're now calling load shedding. A lot of Zambians were not familiar with load shedding, and yet this is a situation that is happening almost in all the Southern African regions. And other than impacting on the energy production, it also impacted directly on food security. We are aware of the situation in Malawi, where, of course, Zambia had to help in supplying some food to Malawi. So coming back home to what are the challenges of climate change. Of course, these challenges, other than the energy sector and agriculture sector, there are some sectors that are quite directly impacted, such as the energy sector and the water sector, and of course the agriculture sector. But there are also sectors that have been indirectly impacted, such as tourism and of course other sectors such as perhaps let me put it in this manner, that climate change has had a significant impact on our industrial activities. Of course, you heard earlier on in the speeches that there's been a reduction also in the amount of energy that was being supplied to the mining sector, which contributes a major percentage of our GDP in the country. And this also led to a reduction in economic growth. So really, the challenges are many, and these challenges we can quite identify with them at household level, at national level, and at, of course, regional level, and also Africa as a whole.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, for those of us who are growing nowadays, one of the impacts is that our hairs are getting worn out faster than it used to be. So the sun is shining on our heads in a much stronger way. So young people are looking like older people. So like me, you can only guess my age. I may be younger than you are thinking, but due to the impacts of climate change, I'm getting a bit different. So, Mr. Shtima, how can we harness opportunities in what is considered this huge problem? Droughts and floods, people losing hair like myself, and many others, that some of the things that Charity has talked about and which Tomiwa talked about. How can we harness opportunities as a result of these impacts? I know that we are all charged. We want renewable energy, but there is also an important aspect of climate change that we need to discuss, which is adaptation. How can we harness these opportunities in what is considered really a negative issue?
Thank you, David, and good morning, participants. But maybe if I seek your indulgence, I would want to tackle 2 points before I come to your question. The issue of what government can do, particularly coming from a government department. I think one of the most important roles that government can play in addressing climate change, first and foremost, is to put in place a policy and legislative framework which would guide players in how to address the challenge. And from the start, countries were grappling with how to address climate change. It's relatively new in terms of the public discourse. And the fact that it's a multi-sectoral, it impacts different sectors. So how do you anchor the policy on climate change? Do you treat it as a mainstream environment policy, or do you craft a new policy that will address all the sectors? That was the challenge that countries faced. But maybe in the Zambian context, just to outline a few steps that have been taken. In 2007, government developed the National Adaptation Program of Action, the NAPA. This was to respond to the most urgent and immediate adaptation needs. All least developed countries had to develop these plans. This has been implemented over the years. It had about 10 project profiles. I think about 5 of them have been implemented at different levels. One has already concluded. In 2011, government developed a more comprehensive strategy, which is called the National Climate Change Response Strategy, which was to coordinate the implementation of climate change activities. And that has also helped government and other players to respond to the challenge over the years. But there was effort starting from as far as 2011 to try and put in place a policy framework to address climate change, and that took a bit of time. But it is important to note that as late as last month, that's in April 2016, government finally put in place a national policy on climate change, which will now guide stakeholders in how to respond to the challenge. So this policy on climate change provides a framework for actors in how to respond to the challenge, and also gives guidance, particularly in how to mainstream climate change in different sectors, because it's only when you have mainstreamed it in different sectors that you'll be able to leverage resources and opportunities that you refer to. But maybe another point that I wanted to address from the presentation before I come to your question is the issue of, is it too late for us to respond to climate change? Have we already reached tipping points or positions of no return? This one is a complex question that cannot be answered through a simple no or yes answer, because it depends on which scale and ecosystem you are looking at. Simpler examples could be, if you look at our aquatic ecosystems, simply the rivers, the streams, and riverines that we have. If you have visited our countrysides, most of the rivers are drying up. Now, what that means is that the species that survive on those ecosystems, most of them are going extinct. They are not surviving because there is no water in those systems. So if you look at it at that level, for some species in very sensitive ecological systems, yes, it is too late. It might be too late for a number of them. But if you come higher, and sometimes we tend to be, I think, selfish when we talk of addressing climate change, we normally look at it on the impact on humans, which is natural. As humans, of course, we have ways of trying to adapt to these changes, respond to them, and try to address them. For example, the shortage of water, we may find ways of digging boreholes and other sources. Now, coming to the question that you posed on how we can leverage opportunities. Yes, indeed, there are a lot of opportunities, both globally, at the global level, and also even at the national level. At the global level, there are frameworks that have been put in place through agreements that countries are party to, particularly the UNFCCC and the financing that is available. The Green Climate Fund, I think, comes to mind, which provides a lot of opportunities. Recently, Zambia, I think it's in May last year, hosted the GCF board. Those are opportunities of funding sources that are available, but what is required is to package projects and bankable programs that can be supported. Also, technology is one opportunity that we can look at. The energy challenge probably could be looked at as an opportunity to move away from some of the energy dependence that we've had on fossil fuels and move to renewables. And this has a capacity to make sure that our rural areas, for example, which could not be reached by the national grid, can finally be connected to some source of electricity through renewables, I think.
Thank you so much. Yeah, first of all, maybe before we move to, there are those things that you put on your ears. So if the sound is not coming out very clear, those like they are hearing aids. So we can assist ourselves so that we're able to get the gist of what everybody is saying. Now, one of the high fives of this conference is Feed Africa, if I remember very well. Do not quote me in case I've forgotten, but I think there's an emphasis on feeding Africa. So in the context of climate change, how do we achieve that? And I would request the presenter to attempt to answer my question. We want to feed Africa, but we have droughts and we have floods. Are there opportunities for the African Development Bank to achieve its objective of feeding Africa in the context of this challenge that we have?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe there is an opportunity in achieving the Feed Africa initiative or thinking. And that is available within the context of looking at how we can create the marginal increase on the productivity from the agricultural sector which requires us to look at the nexus that I mentioned, which are the information and the sustainable integrated approach to achieving agriculture productivity. I mean, the reality is this. We're talking about the extremes of flooding and drought and some other vulnerability, increase in temperature and everything. Now, what this is trying to tell us is that we need to begin to do our productivity. We need to begin to plan our productivity different from what we were doing before. Meaning that information needs to be available to not just the big agriculture farmers alone, but also, in the case of like Zambia, the smallholder farmers who are about more than 60% and contribute to the economy. And I believe it's the same in almost every other part of Africa that we may go to. And the key to this is purely resilience. The ability, the strength for the productive sector to be able to respond and withstand the shocks and the exacerbated impacts of climate change that may be happening to them. So thinking of that in a different way, harnessing these two potential of the extremes of the drought and the flood, and creating a bridge whereby we begin to look differently into what we are producing, when we are producing, and how we are producing it. I mean, for example, if we have a flood in somewhere like the Zambezi floodplain, there's nothing stopping us in harnessing the potential of that water and having it available for, let me say, 2 to 3 months where maybe we may have drought. Then when we harness that water, that amount of water can go back into our irrigation and go back into other farming practices like aquaculture and fish farming, etc. Meaning that on the one side of that extreme, we've been able to harness the potential, and we're using it on the other side of the extreme, opposite end, where we have the drought. But then this requires an integrated approach, meaning that probably we can't do the traditional water harvesting structures again. It has to be a water harvesting structure, probably that can withstand the expected kind of level of flooding that we are looking for. And probably a kind of structure that is able to reduce the rate of evapotranspiration that may happen when we begin to have drought. So meaning that the landscape has to be looked into in a holistic manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just turn to the audience now and a request for anybody who has a question for our panelists. You can be specific when asking questions as to who you want to address that concern that you have. So it's your turn now to talk and to share your views, as well as to ask any questions you think are important to this discussion. Yes, Mr. Zimba. So we'll take the first 3 questions. Are there any other questions from the floor? Yes, Mr. Zimba.
Okay. May I congratulate the panel and obviously our guest of honor and distinguished delegates. My question I want to pose to my brother Eltomira. Do you see a correlation between the urgency and the means to deliver or to respond to that challenge we have? Is there a correlation? Or in fact, there is a disconnect? Resources versus the impacts that we're facing, clearly which you have elaborated and the rest of the teams have. And for this context, your experiences here in Zambia. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next question, please.
Thank you. My name is Ridley Makaliki from ZESCO. Mine is a follow-up question to what the presenter said about water harvesting. Yes, you can harvest water, but with time, there will be usage of this water in terms of irrigation and other activities. Won't the same dam dry up again?
Sorry, can you come again? Louder. The sound system is quite difficult, very difficult to hear. So please repeat the question.
Sorry, I was saying mine is a follow-up question to what the presenter talked about water harvesting. You can create these dams and harvest the water, but with usage, there will be depletion. And if we continue to have these droughts due to climate change, are we going to achieve anything because that water won't be there anymore?
Okay. Any other question? Yes, sir.
My name is Shadrach. I'm from Inca Capital, out of Mauritius. And my question is, what role does an energy balance play in mitigating climate change?
Come again?
What role does an energy balance play in mitigating climate change?
As energy balance?
Yes.
Okay. What role does energy balance play? So let me ask the panelists, maybe starting with Mr. Shtima. Sorry, I think of course you can address the question, and then Tomiwa can also come in. The agency of climate change is yesterday, as it were. The impacts started a long time ago. We are at the heart of it. And the means, are we balancing? What do we need to do to balance the two?
Thank you very much. Yeah, the agency, of course, as we have stated, is long overdue. I think it's no longer debatable. Now everyone can see the impacts. But how are we responding in terms of resources? I think Mr. Zimba is referring to the resources in terms of addressing the challenge. There have been studies at the global level, for example, that have estimated how much we need if we are to respond to this challenge effectively. I can't recall the figures off cuff, but some of them run in billions of dollars annually if we are to address the challenge effectively. Of course, you can address this question at the global level and also at the national level, because it's also important to know what are we doing at the country levels in terms of responding to the challenge. I think it is fair to state that the resources, both at the global level and even at the domestic level, do not seem to match the agency with which we are faced. In figures, particularly at the global level, you could hear a lot of figures that are stated as being available for climate change, adaptation and mitigation, but the modalities of accessing these funds and actually implementing activities are almost difficult. We have been accessing, but I think the modalities are almost very difficult, particularly for least developed countries. Capacities are being built, but I think we still need more to be done if we are to respond to the challenge effectively. So the short answer is it doesn't seem to match as we stand at the moment.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. I mean, there's always an argument if you ask those who are making the money available. They say, look, we give you plenty of money, but you don't use it. So is it an issue of resources or is it an issue of preparedness as countries? So in short, how do you see the role of government, the role of private sector, and the role of different players in this achieving this balance? I'll ask Tomiwa, of course, and then Charity can answer this question, because I think that's the issue of balance. Let's not look at it from one side. It also needs to be balanced across various players. So, Tomiwa, can you attempt to answer that question?
Okay, thank you, moderator. I think starting up from the angle of there's so much money out there, is it being used, utilized, and tied to that, I would say, is what is the efficiency and effectiveness of even the utilization of those that have been accessed? I mentioned about the fact that the paradigm shift has to happen about the thinking about climate change investment. It has to go beyond the normal developments, 1. 2, the next thing that is related to that is what I think Mr. Shetima said about the difficulty of even accessing some of the resources. And I always say this with most countries that I work with, in the sense that any donor out there trying to get a resource out to you is looking at climate financing different from the lens of normal development financing. And this is one of the things that is anchoring on one of the thinking of the Green Climate Fund, asking countries to be national implementing entity on their own, and for them to do that, they have to go through more like a very grueling screening process, in which they are looking at their fiduciary standard, the governance standard, the safeguard standard, and the absorption capacity of that country. Meaning that if you can meet all those criteria, if you can make those criteria happen, then you are putting yourself on a level of a playing level where you are able to say, I want to utilize these resources. So what I would say is that it's not about just having the resources out there, but it's about thinking of it in a different format whereby, I mean, for example, I know in Zambia, the government have been trying to look at the fact that when they're doing their development planning, in the budgeting process, they're looking at sort of like putting in place an incremental cost from their own budget, apart from what is coming in from the donors, to be able to sort of like look at how they can achieve better result, effective result, efficient result from any climate financing. Not just looking at, oh, the donor is bringing in 50 million, so all our planning is on that 50 million. But rather looking at, okay, the donor is bringing in 50 million, our budget for this sector is 30 million, but then we realize that for us to have an effective and efficient result, we may need to make available probably an additional 5 million so that we can achieve a kind of investment that can start the test of time on the long term as we're facing the impact of climate change.
Thank you so much. Charity, we have challenges, as it were, in accessing funds. So the saying goes. What role does government play?
I think that government has a very important role to play in the access of these climate change funds. First of all, I think that government should create an enabling environment, in the sense that government has to put up the right policies, which government is already doing. I mean, we just had the climate change policy approved not very long ago. And of course, government has to integrate this climate change into our developmental process, starting from the national level, going down to the districts and to the communities, because in fact the communities are the ones that are adversely impacted. We already heard that 60% of our population live in rural areas. So that's 60% of the 13 million people in Zambia live in rural areas. And these are people that really have low adaptive capacity, high poverty levels, and the impacts of climate change will be basically, really felt more in the rural areas or by the communities living in the rural areas. So we need to have these plans, developed even at the lower levels. And so I agree with the bottom-up approach, where we should try to develop plans that can actually address or help to develop resilience in these communities living in the rural areas. And of course, when it comes to accessing these funds, it is true that the fiduciary standards most of the times kind of limit a lot of African countries to access these funds, but we need to also, as African countries, just be a little more aggressive. Of course, there are requirements such as you need to have a national designated authority, which in Zambia we recently had a launch of the Ministry of National Planning being the national designated authority for the Green Climate Fund. So, and even in the absence of perhaps the implementing entity, because that's another area which is a requirement to accessing these funds that you need to have a national implementing entity. And we already have some of these, our partners who are accredited. I mean, the entities need to be accredited. And we already have some of our partners who are accredited, and we can access these funds through our partners, like, for example, the World Bank or UNDP, or indeed, in fact, the African Development Bank. But we need to be aggressive to, to really get these funds, because you can see some of our countries, some of our other African countries have already begun to put up plans to get these funds, and perhaps that's what we need to learn from our friends, and as an example, and just be aggressive to ensure that we get these funds into our country, going into addressing adaptive and mitigation projects.
Thank you so much. The question about the energy, how do we achieve energy balance? And I'm not sure that we have adequate expertise to explain the whole range of energy issues, but I know that in your presentation, Dr. Miwa, you touched on this. So, how do we go about achieving this energy balance? If I got the question right. Yeah, given our context in Zambia, we have challenges with, for example, the water.
Moderator, we only have 2 minutes.
Yes. So how do we achieve that?
In fact, on that question, by the time you were asking the question, I was smiling because I could see right in front of me my colleague, who is an energy specialist from the World Bank, and I was telling him, this is your question. I was pointing at him so that he can know that he has a role to play once he sits down over here. But then the reality is that it's a mix. You have to create a mix, and at the same time, you have to be able to look at the demand versus the supply, and at the same time, also probably begin to think differently on the utilization approach. In most cases, I remember, doing the smallest thinking and things that will conserve your energy, beyond even just the productivity, So when you have the mix, you look at the balance, the supply versus the demand, and also you now look at the last part of it, which is how you utilize it at the end of the day. And that helps you to begin to look at the balancing of your energy. And probably, before I end up, is a question about the water harvesting. It's not just about just having the infrastructure, but also having the right information on the kind of usage. I wouldn't expect to begin to, now what your question is going into the critical technical aspect of programs and projects. For example, if I am in a location where, like for example, Western Province, Mungu, rice is very, very much an interesting thing for people to grow over there. But then if the problem is that there is and rice is always water intensive, so meaning that if there's going to be a drought, if there's drought, the early warning information is there or should be available for me to know that I should not be growing rice at this season. I'm probably moving to an alternative kind of crop. So in that way, when we begin to look at the combination of the information available, that's climate information, the early warning system, and everything, then we can be able to plan very well how to use our resources. The reality is this: yes, there will be times of excess, and there will be times when there is no excess. But what is important is how we take that balanced middle line within the whole approach. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We come to the end of this session. Let me thank Iretomiwa, Charity, and Mr. Ephraim for helping us to discuss this topic. And thank you so much for those questions from the audience. And thank you very much, ZDA, for the time you gave us.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. May we give them a round of applause for that discussion. Climate change indeed is very important, and we all need to take action. And I'm sure we've heard the discussions from our panelists. And as countries, I think we need to take action. Thank you. We go next straight into our next discussion. And this time round, we are looking at rising demand for energy. What are the immediate measures to reduce the energy gap? May I call upon the moderator, Mr. Ledley Makaliki, Senior Manager, Demand Side, ZESCO, to come up with the panelists. Lead speaker, Professor Mwenechanya from the University of Zambia. And we have the discussants, Mr. Joseph Kapika, Energy Specialist from the World Bank. We also have Mr. Titus Mwendenda, Chief Commercial Officer, CEC. Could you please come up and we can begin the discussion, please? So we've heard that Zambia's demand for energy has been rising due to robust GDP growth of more than 6% per year for the past decade in the country, particularly in mining, manufacturing, and agriculture sectors. So our discussion this morning will be to try and look at the rising demand for energy. What are the immediate measures to reduce the energy gap? We have an hour to discuss that, if we can keep the time, and I'll hand over to the moderator.
Thank you very much. The topic for discussion, as has been said, is the rising demand for energy. What are the immediate measures to reduce the energy gap? And considering the theme for the FDB annual meeting, which is energy and climate change. As an introduction, Zambia's demand for energy has been rising due to robust GDP growth of more than 6% per year for the past decade in the country, particularly in the mining, manufacturing, and agriculture sectors. The demand for electricity in the country has been growing at an average of 3% or between 150 and 200 megawatts. There are currently 4 main electricity companies in Zambia: the state-owned ZESCO, Copperbelt Energy, CEC, Lunsemfo Hydropower Corporation, and Ndola Energy. Zambia is also part of the Southern African Power Pool, in which the annual electricity consumption reaches 400 terawatt hours with a peak demand of 56,000 megawatts, and an installed capacity of 62,000 megawatts. Given these factors, the demand for electricity in the country is high and expected to exceed in the coming years. Which areas, that is the question, which areas should not be affected by the energy shortage, and what are the immediate measures to alleviate the impact? And to provoke the discussion, we are going to have a presentation from Professor Jory Mwenechanya, who is in my immediate left. And to help discuss the topic, I have Dr. Joseph Kapika from World Bank and Mr. Titus Mwendemena from Copperbelt Energy Corporation. So, Professor, it's time to make your presentation.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me this platform to discuss with you the question before us, which is rising demand for energy, and what are the measures to reduce the impact. Let me begin with a disclaimer. I am going to express personal views. I do not wish to misrepresent the government or any institution that I may be affiliated with. What I want to discuss is shown on that slide. It will be a very brief presentation. What I was asked to do actually is the last bullet. What needs to be done? But I thought I should give it some context so that the actions that we may highlight can be discussed in those circumstances. I should also, right at the outset, say that I'll focus very much on Zambia, but I know that many of the challenges, many of the issues that I will mention are common to many African countries, particularly at this time when Africa has enjoyed rapid economic growth. So the first issue is what has driven demand. I could not give a better introduction to that than the video you saw at the beginning. We have many sectors that have been performing extremely well and enabling the economy to grow at an average of 7.4% per annum for the last 10 years. That is a phenomenal growth, considering that in the earlier period, we were doing much less than that. These growth areas of the economy have tended to be energy intensive. The biggest consumer of our electricity in Zambia is mining. That, first of all, experienced a resurgence, and we opened new mines, particularly in the northwestern part of the country. Construction is very visible, resulting in much infrastructure requiring to be serviced by additional energy. Manufacturing, and as I say, you saw these things in the video, cement, steel, food processing, and so on. We also have an expansion of especially commercial farming, and farming blocks have been opened up. All this is adding to the economic growth. So economic growth is one of two major drivers of electricity demand. The second driver is population growth. In 1994, we had 9 million people. At the beginning of 2015, we had 14 million people. I use 1994 because that year was also the year when government enacted the first national energy policy. That provided the backdrop. The population at that time was 9 million, and by 2015, we had 15 or 14 million people. The growth of the population results in a demand for additional services, for additional infrastructure, and in relation to electricity, there's been a huge drive to electrify urban areas. We have a Rural Electrification Authority, of which I am the chairman, and that has a program to electrify rural areas at an increasing pace, trying to keep up with the population. We have social amenities also having to be increased, water, health, schools, etc. In addition, we have a decentralization program which has resulted in additional districts, and they are becoming centers of energy consumption. So I'd like to just focus on those two. That is to say, first of all, economic growth, and secondly, population growth. On the supply side, I would identify three causes. The first is insufficient generation capacity, clearly. The second is to do with the constraints in the transmission and distribution network. The third is the low availability of our hydro plants due to the current or the previous drought. I think it's important to mention that although there is much focus on the drought, there is an underlying shortfall even without the drought. We have had load shedding in this country for much longer than the occurrence of the drought, particularly from 2006. So if we get through the drought, as the expectation is, we should not forget that we have an underlying problem of the capacity. So I'd like to think of this with the sense of peeling an onion. So we have issues with supply. What is the problem? The first problem I would identify has to do with delays in project implementation. In 1994, again, when we did the first national energy policy, the installed capacity in Zambia was 1,760 megawatts. In 2015, it had grown by around 300 megawatts to 1,148 megawatts. This is far short of what was happening on the demand side, because in electricity terms, the demand was growing by something like 250 to 300 megawatts per year. And yet this growth of 10 to 11 years is about the same level, 300 or just over 300. And I list there a number of projects. As an example, we had a power rehabilitation project which ran from the end of the 90s to or perhaps the beginning of the 2000s. This project was focused on increasing capacity at our three main stations, which are Kafue Gorge, Kariba North Bank, and Victoria Falls Power Station. It would have resulted, or it has resulted, in additional capacity of 210 megawatts. We also increased the availability of the plant at Victoria Falls, which is rated at 108 megawatts, but was producing something like 70 at the time due to the poor state of the machinery. That project ran on and on and on. I think primarily due to implementation capacity, but also because the scope was being changed as it went along. So it took a long time to do that. We could have gained more than 200 megawatts out of that. Itajiteji, which is just coming online, has been discussed for the last 20 years. Similarly, Kafue Lower, 750 megawatts, has been discussed probably even longer, from the mid-1990s. Mamba, perhaps not so long. I think Kafue Lower is particularly significant in relation to the current drought, because this station will use the same water that the current Kafue Gorge uses. So logically, you would expect that even with the reduced amount of water, we would have done better being able to use the same water on that river course. The last bullet there is to do with other stations. These are smaller stations, particularly in the north. And again, in the context of the current drought, that is important as well, because the location of these smaller power stations is in a different area than Kariba and Kafue. They are up in the north, where the rainfall patterns are more favorable and tend to be different from the south. So we would have benefited if the rehabilitation of those power stations had happened on time. So that's the first cause, project delays. The second cause of the shortfall is low investment. And I repeat those figures of capacity, just to keep them in your mind. There are two main issues there. Firstly, the government does not have the capacity to invest by itself in the sector. The sector is intended, or should be in a condition to attract its own investment. The very big power stations like Kafue Lower and the envisaged Batoka will always require some government participation purely because of the size. But there are many other things that we can do apart from the big stations. for which the government really needs assistance. We have had low private participation. The example that has been highlighted even at this conference is the Copperbelt Energy Corporation, which has grown in bounds. But both the Copperbelt Energy Corporation and the Lunsemfa Hydropower Company are actually consequences of a privatization process. They are not direct greenfield investments. And we need to make that distinction, because the problem that we have is to attract new entrants into the system, into the sector. We also have now, which I haven't put there, Ndola Energy, which is significant in its own ways, and that is quite different from both Copperbelt Energy and Lunsemfa. So, peeling the onion, if we look at private participation, I think the first cause of that is limited reforms. We have established since the end of the 90s an independent regulator, the Energy Regulation Board. So the legislation was changed to allow for the establishment of an independent regulatory authority for the energy sector. So that was done, which is positive. The Electricity Act was also revised to allow for private sector participation, for private entry. So that legislation removed the monopoly which ZESCO had enjoyed up to that point. So ZESCO, our national utility, was no longer the only player in the electricity industry. The utility itself, which had operated more or less as a semi-statutory authority, was changed into a corporate entity under the Companies Act. So it established its own articles of association, and the intention was for it to operate as any commercial entity. Those are the reforms at the root. These are the reforms that have taken place. When you look at the 1994 policy, you see that a number of things have not happened. ZESCO remains wholly state-owned and vertically integrated. This has many implications for entrants. It has many implications for regulation. It has many implications for the whole sector. The private sector that we have referred to, both CEC and Lunsemfa, Ndola Energy, and even in distribution where we have Northwestern, are all operating at the margins of a core, a huge core, which is under ZESCO. The second issue that I see is that we really have not formalized this market structure. We have not said what transactions can be done. ZESCO now operates by default as a single buyer. So when private entrepreneurs wish to establish an independent power plant, they are looking to ZESCO as the off-taker. Okay. This is very limiting because ZESCO has its own problems. So, peeling the onion, what is the issue with the off-taker? It's in poor financial health. If you have a project and you wish ZESCO to be your off-taker, the first point of call is the books. How healthy does ZESCO look? And I'm afraid it doesn't look too good. I should also clarify that I'm giving you a historical perspective. Some aspects may have improved over time, but I'm giving you the factors that have led us to where we are. So it is not a statement on any particular administration, on any particular management of ZESCO. This is a cumulative effect. We've had a weak off-taker financially. The elephant in the room, as they say, is obviously tariffs. And it's a complex issue. It is not just a question of raising tariffs. There are many, many other issues with that. The tariffs have remained below cost-reflective level, and to some extent, this is why ZESCO has become a default off-taker, because it is the only utility, it is the only entity that can sign contracts of that kind, where they are buying energy at a higher price and selling it lower. Okay? So it is not possible really to do much until we address the issue of tariffs. High system losses. I used to be with the Energy Regulation Board, and in one particular year I recall that we received an application from ZESCO for an increase of tariffs. I think it was 25%. When we examined the case, when the staff did the analysis, our estimate was that if ZESCO was able to collect just 10 to 15% of what the consumers owed ZESCO, they would be asking for no change in tariff. So the collection rate was extremely poor. This has changed dramatically, particularly with the installation of prepaid meters. So this has changed, but it is a matter that has been a problem for ZESCO and has weakened its liquidity. So I come to the question that I was asked to address, which is what needs to be done. We seem to have a technical problem. What I've done is to look at the challenge that ZESCO faces immediately. What are its immediate objectives? The first objective for, the first objective for ZESCO is to prevent the system from collapsing, to prevent system collapse. If the demand is allowed to rise excessively, the system can collapse because there are certain devices in the system that protect the equipment, and if they sense this rise, they'll simply shut it down. So ZESCO needs to manage the load so that the system does not collapse. The second objective is to prevent loss of life. We have hospitals, we have people working in underground mines, we have many other institutions that are sensitive in terms of loss of life. We also have to maintain public health and safety, so water pumping stations must be a priority, hospitals, street lighting for security is a priority, and we have certain sensitive installations such as airports, and I would include in that high-density areas where crime rises very rapidly. In addition to all that, ZESCO needs to minimize costs. The cost of importation, some of which has been in the public domain, is extremely high. So in managing the priorities, ZESCO needs to be sure that what is being imported addresses key priorities in the economy and in the society. To meet the immediate objectives, the strategy for ZESCO must be demand-side management. And load shedding is the reason for this. We need to maintain the load below a certain level. There are also measures for energy efficiency. Industry has certain incentives, for instance, for shifting their schedules so that they can reduce the demand on the system, especially at peak times. Public education is extremely important, and ZESCO is very aggressive with this. ZESCO has also been distributing efficient light bulbs in a program to replace incandescent lamps. We haven't done very much on off-grid solutions, encouraging our households perhaps to use different energy sources other than electricity. And I don't mean charcoal. I think gas has many possibilities. When you go around many countries, there are very few, or let's say in many countries, electricity is used not so much for cooking, but for lighting and for things that consume, for entertainment and so on. Cooking is very energy intensive. Heating water, cooking are very energy intensive. So we could encourage our households much more to go off the grid for those applications. Remember, I said we have a supply shortfall, which is a capacity issue, but we also have an issue with transmission and distribution. Before the drought, there were many times when the power stations were available, they could deliver power, but areas were load-shedded because the capacity of the network could not deliver the system. So let's not forget, the problem is broader than power stations. We need to enhance security of supply. This is just jargon for saying we need to have different types of energy sources, not just hydro. As the theme of this conference goes, we need to go into areas such as renewable energy. And there is a lot of activity in this area. We also need to increase the efficiency of energy use. We have very many areas where people are just profligate. They do not care how much they use. Part of this is a consequence of low pricing. As long as the prices remain low, there is no incentive for using less. So we will go around in circles, and many of the questions will appear to revolve around the issue of price. Okay. I have lost control. Okay. So, the price. The price has been an intractable issue for a long time. What we should understand about this industry is that many of the decisions we take are very long-term decisions. When people invest in electricity infrastructure, they are signing contracts 10, 15 years, sometimes even 20 years. So it is important that we have some broad consensus, some broad national consensus about the migration of the tariff to cost-reflective levels. If there is no consensus, what is likely to happen is that we shall have reversals in decisions. If a decision is taken, an administration takes over, it's reversed. And this is an area for a lot of social and political sensitivity. And being where we are in that program, I'll say no more. We also need to tackle the structure of the industry. We have committed in the 1994 policy to unbundling, to privatization, to many things, many radical things. Nothing has happened. We revised the policy in 2007, 2008. There is still some commitment, albeit less strong, towards a reform. What one is advocating here is not just a simplistic commitment, a kind of ideological commitment to unbundling. That's not the issue. The issue is to start with the objectives, start with the analysis of the problem we're trying to solve, and work backwards to design a structure that best meets those objectives. It's clear that we have done what we are doing now for many years. And somebody famous did say that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, then you need a re-examination. So we've done what we have been doing, and it hasn't produced the results that we wanted. We can't do much worse by at least reformulating our strategy and looking at the structure of the industry. We need to accelerate project development and completion. This is something that currently is receiving very active attention. We need to increase the share of non-hydro. Hydro dependence to the level of 97% or thereabouts is extremely risky. And the risk has been shown not just in the current drought. We have had other droughts before. It's just that now the demand is much, much higher. So for on-grid, when we are building power stations to supply the grid, maybe we should increase the share of renewable energy. And I would say at this point that the renewable energy plants that we put on the grid, perhaps we should be looking at smaller sizes, perhaps 10 megawatts, that sort of level. Because if you build 100 megawatts in one locality for solar, the impact on the grid because of the change of output from the solar is great. You have swings which can cause problems for the system. So it is better to distribute the plants throughout the system and geographically spread out so that when the sun or when the clouds move, they don't cover the whole plant at the same time. We need to promote off-grid renewable energy for rural areas so that we're not looking to the grid for all our needs, particularly in the rural areas, which also have issues of distance. We need to promote home solar, and in particular, I am very keen on the Department of Energy adopting, together with the Association of Consulting Engineers, to look at building codes so that these can be available for use for people that are building houses, including private developers and also the National Housing Authority. Lastly, it's about time we banned incandescent lamps. We should ban them. It is not enough for ZESCO to spend, I think, upwards of $2 million distributing free lamps, energy savers, and as soon as they are finished, we revert to incandescent lamps and the situation doesn't change. It is time that we bit the bullet and simply said, these are banned. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Professor. The presentation has highlighted, I think, two characteristics of an electricity crisis. One is that of a capacity constraint, where the installed capacity is not able to meet the demand. And the other one is the energy constraints, where you have enough capacity, but you don't have enough generation fuel in terms of, say, for the fossil fuels or the water for generation. International experience shows that successful management of an electricity crisis requires implementation of a wide range of measures, including strong energy conservation campaigns, action plans to reduce end-use consumption, efforts to reduce energy production losses, and remove transmission and distribution bottlenecks, and measures to increase the supply, as well as cost-reflective tariffs, like what was in the presentation. I would like to pose a question of how far we have fared in these aspects, starting with Titus.
Basically, maybe we can see this from the point of view of supply and demand. It's actually a point of view of supply and demand. As the demand is growing, the issue is how do we bring on board enough supply to meet or even exceed this demand. And when you look at the way the question is phrased, basically it's in tranches where there are some loads which you can do nothing about, or something that you should do nothing about, and what we can do in the immediate term. There are certain things that are being done, but I just want to address it from that point of view. So when you look at that phrasing, so you seem to think that you have to have a closer look at the demand, not just as the demand, but try to unpack it, which also leads you to look at your sources of energy, means what are the various sources of energy that you're going to match against your demand. Because this demand is rising, and so far, if you look at most of the projects, they haven't been closed. So it also brings in the third question to the way your question was phrased is, what are the issues that are facing the utilities? Because basically, in the short term, you are going to look at the people who are actually playing in the market, which is the stakeholders and the utilities. So if you have to look at the short term or immediate terms, then you have to look at the utilities who are players right now. So in terms of what are the issues facing the utilities? Actually, there are two main big issues. One of them is that for the utilities to bring in new energy, and that's what is lacking. We need to bring in new energy. The issue is that you need to finance it. And that's what most utilities are actually grappling with, how to have innovative financing in time in order to bring in this energy. And it's not only the energy sources, it's also the transmission infrastructure to connect these new power stations to the load. And also in the very immediate term, there could be areas that relatively have some excess. So how could these utilities finance this infrastructure in order to remove these bottlenecks that have been alluded to here, in order to bring in the immediate term the power from areas of relative excess to where you have deficiencies? On top of that, the biggest problem is once you bring most of these projects online, the tariff structures do not allow the utilities to sufficiently cover the cost of new generation. So basically, I think in terms of looking at the way forward, these are the issues that are facing utilities. And as ourselves, we, as CEC, trying to play our role in trying to bring in one project. And also we are looking into, if you look at the type of energy mix that we have to look in the future. Also, we're looking into renewables. So basically, I think that's the question that this panel should be discussing.
Thank you. Do we have any comment from Dr. Kapika?
Thank you. And by the way, Mr. Kapika. I think the way of, I like unpacking this in a more strategic way. So what are the issues that we face? One is that we've got insufficient generation capacity, as the slides from Professor Monechanya showed. The second is that we've got limited access to electricity. Only about 30% of the population has got access to electricity. Without that access, they're deprived of a modern way of living, and they are unable to contribute as much as they could to economic growth and welfare of the country. And we have a crisis. Now, there are immediate measures that are being taken to resolve the crisis, and some of these were talked about earlier. And so what I would like to focus more is what should we do in order that we do not end up in a similar crisis again? And I think one issue which led us to where we are today is some deficiencies in planning, in the responsibility for planning within the power sector in this country. And what do I mean by planning? Planning broadly means understanding, first of all, what your primary energy sources are, understanding what their costs are, what the economic costs are, and based on that, developing a plan that shows you what you should develop when and by whom, in a sense. As part of that plan, we also need to be understanding what the demand for electricity in the country over a long term is going to be. And once we have that, I think, and if we have this planning process robust enough, we should prevent this sort of crisis that we have. Linked to that, of course, should also be the launching of the procurement of new generation, new plant to support the new generation, to deliver load to the customers in a timely manner. As Professor Monechanya showed us on his slides, while we may have had some plans previously, there's been this disconnect between planning and procurement of new generation capacity. So I think if we focused a lot of our energies in strengthening planning capacity in the country, it would help alleviate or at least prevent, rather, the sort of crisis that we're in. Regarding the object or the question that has been posed for this session, it appears that the focus is on curtailment of demand, and I think the question is the more important question is satisfying existing demand and future demand. And I think that's what's important going forward for the power sector. Of course, demand should be efficient demand, and I think in the absence of any tariff sort of incentive, it will be difficult to, on a sustainable basis, condition behavior that ensures more efficient demand for electricity. I'll end there, Mr. Moderator.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. The other aspect we heard about in the presentation is that of immediately implementing demand-side management measures. And we heard that ZESCO has been distributing compact fluorescent lamps. So far, they've done about 2.5 million and have been able to save about 120 megawatts. What does industry need to do to contribute to energy efficiency as well? Or do we need legislation to force the industry to embrace energy efficiency? Starting with Titus.
Basically, I don't think we need to legislate uptake of power. What we need is to put in incentives. For example, we know that reactive power now, there will be incentives if you misuse it. And also, if the tariffs are right, they need to give a signal for people to use it correctly.
Any comments from Prof on demand side management for industry?
I would agree with the position that industry responds to price signals. The current program by ZESCO, where industry is assisted to recognize areas of savings, is extremely important. And I think ZESCO has worked with the manufacturers, it has worked with the farmers, it has worked with different groups. The implementation comes down to price, because some of these measures require additional investment. Some of these measures, such as asking an industry to shift its working shifts, may require additional expenditure, people working at different hours. So an industry will always look at the cost and benefit side. If energy is so cheap that it makes no difference whether they invest in some equipment or whether they invest in shifting their work schedules, there is no incentive for them. So at some point, this whole question comes down to cost. Is it worth their while to make the effort, to make the investment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll come to the aspect of financing. The African Development Bank has made $12 billion available for developmental energy projects over a period of 5 years, especially renewable energy, considering the theme of the annual general meeting, energy and climate change. My question is, what are the conditionalities and how can Zambia and Zambian entrepreneurs tap into this resource? I would like to start with Joseph, you coming from the bank.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the African Development Bank. However, I think at the end of the day, financing is available for good projects. And so what is important is that sufficient resources and time is spent on developing good projects that are feasible and bankable. And I think broadly, this is the expectations that DFIs have, and it is on that basis that funding is provided for projects.
And thank you. And a follow-up question to that is that normally project finance is an intricate issue. And usually I think project developers and the lenders engage in prolonged discussions. And by the time I think money is made available for project implementations, conditions on the ground would have changed, usually requiring, I think, scope change as well. What can be done or what can be eased to accelerate acquisition of funding that has been made available from the African Development Bank?
Well, again, difficult to speak for the African Development Bank, but as I said, I think what's important is that sufficient resources and expertise is put into the development stage of the preparation stage of a project. And yes, you mentioned project financing. That's one aspect or the one way that you can fund the sort of infrastructure projects that we're talking about, but it's not the only way. But regardless, in general, regardless of the mode of financing that you have adopted to finance these projects, what is critical is that there is that progression from moving from the concept to having a project. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done between the concept and actually having a project that you can present to financiers to finance, and you end up developing it.
I think there are a number of projects which already have been identified for development, I think, if you visit Ministry of Energy or ZESCO. On this offer that has been made, I would like to find out from CEC, are you taking advantage to develop any of these projects?
I'm sitting from, but I didn't hear the question properly.
Would you like to take advantage of the $12 billion that has been made available by AFD to develop some projects that have been on the table for some time?
Okay, yeah, as I said, as a utility, what we are, all of us, I think, struggling with is to access funds which are properly priced in order for us to bring in new capacity to the market. So if that facility is there, we'll be among the first people trying to access it, and we hope that some of the conditions are tailored to also attract the private sector, because I think the private sector's sort of financing is in a way slightly different from how it's tailored for the public sector.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to turn to the audience to ask the questions or make comments on what was presented by Professor Monechan. Do we have any comments or questions from the floor? Yes, the gentleman there.
My name is Shadrach Sairi from ZDA. I have a question for Mr. Kapika. I'm aware at one time you worked for ERB. I just want to find out whether there are any prospects to have energy coming from bagasse in Zambia. Thank you.
Short answer to that question, yes.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, moderator. My name is Brian Mwanza from the Energy Regulation Board. I just wanted to find out from the panelists, through your interactions with the various institutions within the energy sector, particularly ZESCO and CEC perhaps, are there any institutional barriers that have thus far held back the investment or significant investment in the solar sector or generation of power from solar? Because I'm aware, for instance, with ZESCO, they still do have thermal power plants where they generate power at a cost sometimes 45 cents to 50 cents per kilowatt hour, but solar is still cheaper than that. So are there institutional barriers that have barred solar from coming on in a significant way? Thank you.
Titus, would you like to take up that question?
I think there is a dedicated panel coming on solar on the next one, but I can just give feelers. To begin with, if you look at the tariff framework in the country, the tariffs coming from solar are quite high, so you need a mechanism. I think I can talk also for the ERB. I think they're working on a refit in order to try to, let's say, bring in a subsidy at a certain level. And also in terms of the volumes. So you need to maybe a conjunctive use with the hydropower because of the intermittency. So basically, I just give a highlight, but I think if you're still around, I think there's a panel that's discussing solar just after ours.
Professor, any comments?
I'm not aware of serious barriers. What I do know is that perhaps there could be more streamlining of activities. I don't know, for instance, the current division of responsibilities between the IDC, the Department of Energy, and even the Energy Regulation Board with regard to procurement of large solar. I don't know. I don't even know if there is a problem. But there does seem to be some need for either clarification or actual streamlining. The key institutions for solar are those institutions, Department of Energy, Energy Regulation Board, and so on. What I think many of the developers have been waiting for are the policies regarding the development of such generation. This has to do with the feed-in tariffs, how much will they get paid, what are the guarantees for payment, and this kind of thing. That is a core issue, and I'm being told that this is a matter which may be decided even before the end of the weekend. So if there's a feed-in tariff that is decided, then I think it will have removed one key element in this. Thank you.
Yes, of course. My comment as well is that I'm aware that there's a feed-in tariff that has been developed. And for the procurement of solar, in relation to ZESCO, this is being done by the Industrial Development Corporation. There's currently, I think, a tender for the procurement of 2 by 50 megawatts, which will be installed in Lusaka South multi-facility economic zones. And looking into the future, we are looking at developing a total of about 600 megawatts of solar. Do we have any further questions from the floor? Yes, Madam, there. I'll come to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Maureen Banda Mwanza from the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. My question is for ZESCO or CEC to take up. I heard from Professor Mwanechanya's presentation that at the moment we only have about 30% of the Zambian population accessing electricity. In terms of population distribution, we have 60% Zambians being rural-based. Now, there are projections that in not so distant a future, we will have at least 2/3 of these people moving to urban areas. What I would like to find out is whether there are plans or measures being put in place to address electricity challenges that such a shift in population distribution is bound to bring about. Thank you.
Perhaps from the planning perspective, Joseph?
I thought the question was posed to my colleague, but those sort of shifts in population patterns are the sorts of inputs that would go and inform planning process. So I can't overemphasize the need to have planning institutionalized on an ongoing basis to take into account those things and other factors that have an impact on the load profile for the country.
Of course, government has a vision 2030 to move the electrification levels from where they are at the moment, around 25, to say 50%.
Can I comment on that?
Oh, sorry, Professor wants to comment.
I just want to add to Mr. Kapika's comment. I think from the policy perspective, from the planning perspective, it would not do to simply accept that the people that are in the rural areas will move to urban centers. That, for me, would constitute a failure of development, because the development that this country wishes to see, which is embedded in the plans, in the visions, is that we should increasingly industrialize the rural parts of the country. The reason that people are moving to the urban centers, of course, has to do with the services, it has to do with the comforts, it has to do with some perceptions, many of them wrong perceptions, about better life in town. But there is much, much greater potential in the rural areas themselves to become industrialized. And that's why this program, this forum, is extremely important, because if we can move that access rate from the current 4 to 5% to even 50%, many of the people in the rural areas will not move to the urban centers. Thank you.
And for this purpose, I think government created the Rural Electrification Authority to drive the access to electricity in the rural areas. I'm being told that we are running out of time. I don't know if I can allow just one more question, Madam Moderator, from the floor. One or two.
It's okay?
Two.
Mr. Moderator, my question goes to the professor. If I heard him correctly, he gave one of the reasons why the tariffs for electricity are supposed to be increased to be the wastage. He was saying if the tariffs are increased, it will deter people from wasting power. But my immediate reaction as a consumer, both at domestic and commercial level, is that that would be unfair if we think along those lines, because if there is an element of wastage, then I blame the utility companies that they have not done their work in sensitizing and convincing people that they should not misuse this scarce resource. For me, if we increase the tariff just because we are not using it properly, we are killing the manufacturers, the producers, because they depend on this facility and resource, and it will be unfair because some people are not
Can you
careful.
shorten your question?
So my appeal is to the utility companies to work on sensitization and convincing people that they need to be careful. And I stand to be corrected. I'm liably informed that we are one of the expensive countries in terms of tariff rates, to an extent where we are more than the people we export power to. I'm told Namibian rates are lower than ours. Namibia we export our power to. Professor, I need your reaction. Thank you.
This is a very big question to come at the end, but essentially, I'm also a consumer. So I know, for instance, that when we have installed prepaid meters, we have, in my own household, reduced the amount of energy because it has become quite obvious how much money is going to electricity. So it is not the only measure. I have outlined the measures that ZESCO has. You've seen the videos, you've seen the interviews. They have an aggressive program, but we need to do everything. But the most, especially for industry, the most obvious way of making this an issue for them is to make the price visible. Thank you.
To the contrary, I think the Zambian electricity price is the lowest in the region apart from SNEL, DRC. I would encourage you to look at the Southern African power pool to see. It compares all the rates within the SADC region. At this point, due to, I think, insufficient time, I would like to just summarize in terms of saying, yes, we have a constraint. We experienced the capacity constraint in the year 2010, 2012, but there was sufficient power plants which were set up. For example, Kariba North Bank by ZESCO, as well as the recently commissioned Iteshiteji. Now we have enough in terms of installed capacity. But the issue we're facing is the lack of fuel for generation, which is the water. So In this case, the immediate measures we need to take upon board is that we need to engage in demand-side management activities. I think ZESCO has shown us by way of distributing these CFLs, and we are waiting to a point where the incandescents will be phased out in the country in order for us to stop the distribution, because if we did it now, then we are going to lose all the savings we have made. The cabinet has already approved the phase out of the incandescent. We are just waiting for a statutory instrument to be issued, and I believe this will be quite soon. Industry also can help in terms of retrofitting of equipment. We can get rid of the inefficient motors and go to use technology by embracing variable speed drives to control if we are doing water pumping activities, as well as engaging in power factor correction. As ZESCO, I think we are working with ERB in trying to institute a mandatory instrument for industry who consume above 16 kVA to operate at our power factor of minimum 0.92. There are other measures I think that can be done on the supply side, but these will be in the medium term because they take a bit of time to be implemented. These, like Professor mentioned, is to improve the efficiency levels on the transmission and distribution network, to also accelerate projects that are in the construction, like the small hydros that are being done at the moment. Msonda Falls has been shut off to improve the capacity from 5 megawatts to 10 megawatts. Lusuasi in Serenje will be done the same. Lunzua has already been upgraded from 0.75 to 14.8 megawatts. We also need to take advantage, I think, of the rain pattern in Zambia, because we have seen that towards the south, we receive less rainfall as compared to the north. So we need to take advantage and develop all the capacities we have in terms of hydro, since we have the experience on the Luapula River, which has a capacity of about 2,000 megawatts. I thank you all.
Thank you very much. That was our moderator giving a conclusion. We did have enough time. We said 1 hour. Then we didn't manage it properly, and that's what happens when you don't manage time. But I believe we can continue networking and discussing this topic, and Professor Mwenechanya did an insightful presentation which led to the discussions here. I'd like to thank our panelists who are on the panel for their contribution. Thank you so much. A round of applause. We are, of course, discussing renewable energy solutions. Now, I wish to call upon our last panel, not least, to come and discuss alternative energy solutions, investing in renewable energy. And this is Mr. Manda Mwale, Manager Renewables, CEC. We also have discussants, Mr. Lungu. He's a sector leader, SNV, Biodigester, and Mr. Geoffrey Mpundu, Zambia Sugar. So the question has been hydropower is not really sufficient. So we are now looking to renewable alternatives and whether we can tap into that so that we can take care of all the investments that are coming into our country. Please take your seats. I just wish to thank you all who have been with us this morning and into this afternoon for this investment conference. It cannot be overemphasized to say that energy is really a critical and vital sector in our investment promotion. Thus, this discussion to us is very important, and I also believe it is to you. I now hand over to the moderator, Mr. Manda Mwale.
Thank you so much. A lot already has been said, and I would like even to thank the panel that has just gone before us, because when I was seated there, I was just thinking to myself that they've already started discussing what we are supposed to go into. So maybe our task has even been made much easier. We don't maybe even need to give a lot of statistics. I think we've been hearing statistics probably even from the beginning of this ADB annual meetings. But probably just to put some things into context and perspective, We, as a country, Zambia, have currently facing an energy deficit, I think especially in the electricity sector. And as we've heard, our demand for energy, the growth rate is about 200 megawatts per annum. And so currently we are heavily reliant on hydro energy or hydroelectric power. It has not let us down, but the effects of climate change have come in. And as a result, we are looking at alternative forms of energy. With me is a distinguished panel, and I'll probably just, for now, introduce our lead discussant or lead speaker, Mr. Geoffrey Kaira, who is the CEO of Muhanya Solar, and probably just request that he makes his presentation, and thereafter we'll get into some discussions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My discussion this afternoon is mostly solutions that the solar industry is trying to provide in this country. More so, as a result of this power deficit that we have, the interventions that and incentives that government is putting in place is what I'll probably highlight. To set the stage, that's my scope of discussion. I'll look at private sector involvement in terms of projects. Then we'll look at the positive interventions that government has put in place. Then we'll discuss the challenges. And I'll spend a bit of time on opportunities that the industry is offering. Then we'll conclude. To start with, I would like to give an overview of how electricity is distributed in terms of rural areas. The Rural Electrification Authority has several methods that it uses to electrify our villages. First, by grid extension. Grid extension by way of extending the hydro grid from the urban centers to our villages. This is done via the REA and ZESCO. And of course, the private sector is involved in the implementation. ZESCO also uses diesel generators. I'm sure by this time, I don't know if there's any diesel generators still in use at this moment. Yes, Red is confirming that. Also, REA and NGOs have engaged in installation of standalone solar power systems for schools, clinics, and other public facilities. The World Bank is also involved via the SSMP, the Sustainable Solar Marketing Packages. I think this has happened on 2 occasions. One is underway as we speak. We also have REA implementing mini hydro power generation stations. Of course, the private sector is involved in the implementation. Solar PV microgrids are a new concept in this country. To lead the way, the REA has started installation of these microgrids, which we'll discuss as we go. These are some of the private sector projects that I was able to pick up And I should mention here that this is not all that the private sector is doing. This is what I was able to capture from various private sector players. In about 1998-2000, there was a program that was implemented by the Department of Energy of establishment of energy service companies. 3 of them were created in Chipata, Lundazi, and Nyimba. These were standalone solar power systems that were installed at people's homes in the villages. These companies were collecting a fee. So the business model there was fee for service. So a solar home system was installed at 150 homes in each of these towns. And the local businesses that were given these facilities were collecting a fee to run this business. Up to now, I think there's about 2 of them that are still running. The next one is solar PV systems for rural schools and clinics. This has been ongoing since 2008. The REA has implemented these projects across the country. The private sector was solely responsible for implementation of these projects. So we've installed solar at schools, clinics, and sometimes hospitals in these places, and these systems are still running up to now. There's always a challenge with these off-grid systems, and one part that has been neglected is the maintenance part. So some of these facilities, after a period of about 6 years, they need battery replacement. Not in every place this has happened. So that's a challenge that we still face with these standalone systems. We are also involved in microgrids, as I mentioned. RIEA, through PowerLink, installed a 60-kilowatt microgrid in Impanta of Zambia. This microgrid was put up by the Rural Electrification Authority and handed over to a cooperative society in Zambia. And the cooperative is collecting a fee from the villagers for use of this electricity. This is the first of its kind in this country, and there's several lessons that are emanating from that. The targeted community was about 480 households. I think at this stage we have a little over 200. The hope is that we increase this and we improve the management of this microgrid. Muhanya Solar is also involved in the Eastern Province. We are building a 60-kilowatt microgrid as a result of lessons that we've learned from Panta. Instead of just collecting a fee, we are installing prepaid meters so that the households are going to pay as they go. So we are using a pay-as-you-go model for collection of fees. Added to that, we've leapfrogged Mpanta in terms of technology. We will not collect this money physically. We are going to use mobile money. So each household is going to use a mobile phone to pay for this electricity. So they are not going to walk to an agent nearby to buy electricity units. They will have something like this in their homes, which they will use to punch a token that they will receive via mobile money into the unit, into the prepaid meter that will allow access to the electricity that will be generated from this microgrid power plant. So this is underway. We just finished our formalities with the Zambia Environmental Management Agency, and construction of this power plant is underway. Another 60 kilowatt microgrid being called the Lundazi Green Village Project is also underway. The power plant, the powerhouse has been built. I think all the materials have been moved to site. At this stage, it's not known exactly what business model will be used, but this is being done by National Technology and Business Council. Muhanya Solar and Greenfield were involved on the supply side of the equipment. Another project that is underway is a solar-wind hybrid water pumping solution that's being implemented in Southern Province. I think there are 5 districts in Southern Province which will benefit from this. Here we are using solar photovoltaics and wind turbines to generate electricity to power a submersible water pump. Positive interventions. The government in 1998, through a statutory instrument, zero-rated import duty and import VAT on solar photovoltaic modules. This is still in place, and the industry is still benefiting from that. In 2008, there was a further intervention through another SI, where import duty and import VAT was removed from inverters, deep cycle batteries, solar water heaters, including generators here, diesel and petrol generators, solar water pumps for irrigation. This SI is still in place, so the industry is growing as a result of these interventions from government. Also, another positive thing that happened in the past few years is the price of solar photovoltaic modules has fallen globally. Typically, the price of solar panels or solar modules was about 5 cents per dollar. Today, we are speaking about sub-dollar prices on solar panels. So we are buying solar panels now at about 60 cents per watt. So this is less than $1 in just about 10 years. These are some of the challenges that the industry has faced. The first one is historical. Most Zambians cannot afford solar solutions. The reason is the upfront payment. Solar equipment in this country is imported. Despite the interventions, we have to import these things. And lately, you've noticed that the exchange rate hasn't been very good. So because of that, the upfront cost will remain high for these solutions. Absence of manufacturers locally. In Zambia, we do not manufacture any solar equipment. Because of that, the cost of these solutions will remain high. Most people are not aware about the capabilities of this technology. Mostly people will think about solar for lighting only. But this technology can do what hydropower can do. The only difference is that generation is localized at household level. So in order to do what hydro can do, we have to move away and do power plants like microgrids or megawatt-sized power plants, like what's going to happen very soon. Most banks in this country do not finance these solutions. I'm at liberty here to mention one bank that is involved in promotion and financing of solar solution. Stanbic Bank has taken up the challenge, and if you want a solar project financed at household level, you can go to Stanbic and discuss the terms. like I mentioned earlier, poor performance of our local currency has affected the industry. Opportunities, solar power plants. The deficit in supply from the hydro power stations we have has created an opportunity, and private sector has jumped at this opportunity, and we are seeing changes that government is also involved in the building of megawatt-sized solar power plants via the IDC. Just a few weeks ago, I think the president launched the scaling solar via IFC and the World Bank. These will go up to 600 megawatts, like it was mentioned earlier. Power backup solutions. These are solutions to mitigate the power outages at household level or commercially. The solar industry has seen this opportunity, and there's been a lot of uptake of these solutions from both household level and commercial. Commercial solar PV solutions, 10 megawatts. What you see there is a 10 megawatt solution that was implemented 2 years ago. This is at Lewanika General Hospital. This section is the I department. So the I department has a 10 kilowatt solar PV system that they are using to mitigate the power shortage. Another wonderful intervention that we'll see our villages benefit is the commercial powered, solar powered refrigeration. So what you see there are containers that are refrigerated. These are walk-in refrigerators where you can store vegetables, you can store milk. You can use them as kiosks for selling finished dairy products. Another version of the solar cool cube. This is a self-standing cold chamber that can be used for refrigerating fish on a large scale. It doesn't need the grid. You can have solar to power this refrigeration unit. These are walk-in refrigerators that target businesses in off-grid areas. These cold spaces are available for rent or partial rent if you want. People can rent a portion of the container to keep their produce before it's taken to the market. It can also be used for storing milk, or can be used to store dairy products, like I mentioned. It can also be used for charging phones, and can also be used as an entertainment unit, because if you look at the unit itself, it can be used as a screen to show a movie in the village using the same solar power that is generated from the sun. Another new concept that is just about to hit the ground in this country is the pay-as-you-go solution. I already mentioned something we're doing in Sinda. Pay-as-you-go solar is well developed in East Africa and West Africa. We're going to see these concepts to improve our lives in rural areas. Our villages can also have DSTV via small solar units. More than 70%, like we heard, use kerosene and candles for lighting. The question is, why don't they use solar lights? The answer is the same. The cost, the initial cost of buying a solar light is prohibitive for people in the village. A typical good quality solar light will cost between 250 and 300 kwacha. that's significant amount for a villager. So how do we solve this problem? We use pay-as-you-go. The initial cost can be removed by allowing these villagers to pay for it in small bits using a model of rent to own. Instead of buying the light at 300 kwacha or 300 or 350, you can allow these villagers to pay via mobile money $2 per week for a period of about 18 months. And after that, they will own the product and it will unlock permanently. So while they are paying, they will need to pay about $1.5 to $2 per week in order to have service from this device. So after 18 months, they will be able to own this product. The benefit to a distributor are that you are going to de-risk your business because you are going to take these products and you're not going to sell instantly. You're going to distribute them to people in the villages. Of course, you have to register them. When you register them, you give them the product and they'll start to pay. And these devices have a prepaid mechanism inside it so that when they charge it, it gives them access. It could either be lighting, charging a phone, or powering home appliances like TVs, refrigerators, electric fan, and so on. So if you don't charge it, the device will lock and you don't have service. But it will remain in working condition until you input a code via mobile money to allow it to give you access to electricity. And after 18 months, it will unlock permanently and you can have it forever. In my conclusion, I would like to say and state that electrifying communities via grid extension is slowly becoming an obsolete and expensive undertaking. If we want to reach remote communities which are underserved quickly and cost-effectively, microgrids, discrete solar are the solutions for the 21st century. So extending the grid is expensive. Just taking the line from one point for 20 kilometers might cost you 15 million kwacha. But putting up a microgrid is much less, and it will save 400 people. So I think we have to rethink the way we're going to electrify our villages. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kaira. What we have in Zambia is that for a long time we've been talking about potential when it comes to solar and other alternatives. The presentation was largely talking about solar. But then again, we speak about potential in wind, geothermal, and bioenergy, and other alternative forms. I would like to turn to Mr. Lungu from SNV to just give us also SNV's experiences as regards the biodigester.
Thank you. As SNV, globally, we have constructed over 600,000 biogas plants. In Africa, about 51,000. And I'm glad in Zambia, we're supposed to construct about over 3,000 digesters. And so far, we have embarked over 100 digesters across the rural areas. We are focusing more on using animal dung to produce energy for cooking, lighting, and for power generation. That's what we are focusing in because of it's a project funded by the donor. So in 3 years' time, we're supposed to have installed over 3,375 biogas plants from the range of 4 cubic meters to the range of 20 cubic meters. And so far, the response has been overwhelming, especially if for people who have got cattle, pigs, chickens, and also have got response from municipal council where they want us to use their landfill waste to generate electricity in order to cut off the energy crisis. So a biogas plant, basically, the one we are promoting in Zambia, we are using a fixed dome type, which is more of a brick force kind of construction, which is about 2 meters underground, and it's a dairy kind of feeding. And apart from the biogas that is generated, it can also be used for power generation. A 20 cubic, for example, you can install a biogas generator, but you can also install a common generator that we have to produce electricity, for example. A biogas plant also can be connected to a chiller. We have done studies. This year, we're going to have over 10 or so prototype of chillers where you can use biogas to chill milk. And also the other aspect is that apart from the biogas that is produced, there's also an issue of bioslurry, which is an organic fertilizer, which farmers have adopted and have been using in their fields. So biogas is also a carbon neutralizer. If manure is left in the field, it's able to escape in the atmosphere, it's able to affect the ozone layer. But once we capture it and we're able to burn it, we neutralize its power. So that is one of the benefits of the biogas that we have installed. We have done also studies in other countries where we have used prisons to generate electricity, because you can also use human waste, for example, to generate electricity. You can also use the municipal waste, like the sewage waste, to generate electricity. Those are some of the experiences SNV has globally. But in Zambia, in a nutshell, our aim in 3 years by 2018 is to construct over 3,000 biogas plants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lungu. I'm sorry, maybe one of the organizers can help us. We are getting feedback from behind here. The technical team. Thank you. Small commercial break. We'll proceed, and next is Mr. Godfrey Mpundu from Zambia Sugar, and I'm sure we will also get to hear some of their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our experience of biofuel is interesting. I think when people think about sugar manufacturing, it probably doesn't come straight out how much energy intensive the process is, both from an electrical demand perspective, from a thermal energy demand perspective. But any sugar industry and any sugar industry across the world will have to deal with a lot of energy demand. For Nakambala, for example, the factory which I run will be demanding about 13 to 15 megawatts when we're operating. But to irrigate our fields of the 18,000 hectares across the estate, you're then requiring another 23, 25 megawatts, and you start seeing that the kind of energy demand that the whole business needs quite quickly becomes a big number. So therefore, for us to be able to sustain ourselves, and when you think about where you are, whether you're here where we're relying on ZESCO for hydroelectric, or indeed if you're somewhere else relying on somebody else, just the cost of actually having that power available and actually being able to do it becomes a bit of a challenge. So for Nakambala, we actually use bagasse. There was a question asked in the, across earlier about the use of bagasse. Or we have 40 megawatts installed capacity at Nakambala. We generate probably because of efficiencies around about 36, 37 megawatts, and with the factory will be self-sufficient. We normally run a short deficit because the state is still quite big, and we probably import somewhere around 5-6 megawatts from ZESCO. So, but when you look at bagasse as a source of fuel, it's actually a sustainable, renewable feed source. The calorific value of bagasse is comparable to most fossil fuels that you look at. When you're dealing with it, the only big difference will be the moisture content that you have to deal with. If I go back, you look at a stick of cane, you're bringing in something like 70% moisture, and you've got about 14% fiber coming in with about 14% sugar. So as you take the sugar out, that fiber that you're left with will be largely fiber with a little bit of sugar left in it that you can take out, and it's that we use as a source. Of course, what we'd really like to do is to make the site self-sufficient. That would mean looking for extra generation. But to stand the capital costs that you'd need for us to be able to do that with the current tariffs and incentives that they are, just makes the projects not a goer. But it doesn't mean to say we've stopped looking, so we still look not just generation, we also look at usage. We're very focused on how can we reduce every ton of steam that we get, how can we make the most of that? And therefore, you also look at your power consumption, where we're using power, how can we best use that without having to and reduce the demand that the exposure that we have to ZESCO at the moment. So as an alternative renewable fuel, I think it's demonstrated. It's not new technology, it's existing technology across the world. Of course, one of our byproducts from the sugar process is molasses. You can also use molasses and carry out fermentation to make an ethanol product. And that ethanol, you can either designate it into fuel ethanol or potable ethanol. So again, from the process, the energy that's in the sugar, you can reuse that to generate more power.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mpundu. At least on the panel, we have different technologies at play. We have solar, we have biodigesters, a form of bioenergy, as well as bioethanol. In Zambia, we also have potential in geothermal, and I think there are studies also that are looking at the wind potential as well. But probably just to turn to the panel before we open the floor to questions, I'm sure there should be a few burning questions on the floor. Probably from your experience, Mr. Kaira, or even Mr. Mpundu can answer this. What do you think are the main challenges that we are facing that are causing us not to realize the potential? Because I think we've been singing the potential song for a very, very long time. Potential in terms of how much solar we can deploy. Probably even potential in terms of how mini grids that can be, mini hydro stations that can be set up, and even other forms of energy. What are some of the major challenges that you came across? Maybe we'll start with Mr. Mpundu and then move to Mr. Kaira. Yes. We can start with you, Mr. Mpundu.
Alternative fuel?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought it was directed to my colleague there. Sorry. Yeah, I think alternative fuel remains a key area to explore because as what's being demonstrated with the previous session when they talked about demand, actually what we're finding is when you rely on something like hydro or something like that more than the alternatives, you will find yourselves that we actually don't even have the power. So never mind being efficient, never mind trying to increase tariffs or anything like that. Because of just the general demand across the country of what we're seeing, you might find that you don't actually end up having the power that's available. So looking at geothermal, looking at biodigestion, which we know that in effluent plants where you can run a proper effluent plant, you end up with methane. The methane will be a gas that you could use to generate power. Or looking at bagasse, as I've already said, and indeed conversion of molasses into ethanol and then reusing that fuel to generate more power becomes opportunities for particularly a country like ours that's more like 90% reliant on hydro. So yes, exploring all these alternatives remains a key factor, particularly the renewable ones. The only comment I would make is that there needs to be a drive and support by people like the ZDA in terms of enabling us, giving us some enabling acts into getting this to get through in terms of capital investment.
Mr. Kaira, in terms of project implementation?
I think the challenge is really a paradox. Paradox in the sense that solar is expensive technology meant for the poor. So it's a little bit hard for people to invest in solar in villages. So one of the ways that you can go around that is the pay-as-you-go model that is coming our way, and that's what we see as a possibility to really permeate to the rural areas and be able to have a return on the investment. But building a power plant to save thatched houses is probably a huge challenge for any commercial business.
And Mr. Lungu?
Yeah, I think I agree with him. Basically, like from my experience as SNV, we have been piloting household kind of energy installations. And the cost, as he has said, is also high. For example, it's from $400 to about $700. That's the biggest biogas plant we are encouraging. But if you look at also the households we are targeting, it's the issue of the economic scales don't really tally. So those are some of the challenges we are facing. But how do I address that? The best way of doing it is also targeting households, like for example, we have targeted households that are able to produce milk and are able to supply to Parmalat, for example, and all these companies, that they have got some savings which they can invest in renewable energy sources. That is one way. One way is also creating awareness about the benefits of having renewable energy around in the rural areas or somewhere else. We haven't done a lot of awareness. We only came, I think, solar became so popular after maybe the load shedding, but not as much as it was maybe in the 80s. It's because there was lack of awareness. I think we need to move towards that. The other aspect is the issue of credit. Very few banks would want to invest in, for example, in giving out credit for biogas installations because of the policy issues. It's unclear. Some of them are saying, no, it's not possible. How do we get back our money? If, for example, in a rural area, the lack of collateral, how do we address all those issues? So those are some of the challenges, but the best way of moving from that is also to create awareness, making sure there's a lot of policy environment that enables this kind of technology to flourish in Zambia and also to help create demand for the product. I think that is one way. And also lowering the cost. For example, most of the gadgets we are using for biogas installation are taxed. So how do we make sure that most of these things are zero-rated? For example, the stoves, for example, the biogas generators, we are having difficulties because they are taxed. So how does the government or other key stakeholders enforce such that if you're installing such kind of energy or this kind of investment, the following items are they're tax-free. Those are some of the incentives that I think would be able to create a demand for renewable energy.
Thank you, Mr. Lungu, and I'm glad that this session actually is being coordinated by ZDA. And as regards tax incentives and all that, I'm sure some action will go along that line. I'd like to open the floor for questions. Are there questions from the floor? I can see some hands immediately going up. Okay, I'll start I'll start with the gentleman that side. Yes, yes, please. So, because we've got 3 hands, we are going to take 3 questions. 3 questions. So, 3 questions means probably 1 question per. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Pastor Gay from Nigeria. I'm a fish farmer. And I was just listening to the solar solutions, and I think it's a very good solution for Africa. But I caught a question or a statement now, and I was just wondering about it. You said solar is an energy source for the poor. And that goes to my mind. Say, why? Is it only poor people that need energy? Or is there something else there that makes it like once you use solar, then you must be a poor person? And then while thinking about that, I said, well, if we're going to make sure solar goes around, we have to change that mentality. It's not a system for the poor. It's a system that generates alternative energy, which is useful for both poor and rich. And I'm just as a suggestion to that, I'm thinking that, well, the government can lead the way by whenever they establish infrastructures, they should power it by solar energy, especially in rural or even urban areas. When people see that, well, the government at hand is using this kind of facility, it might encourage them to see, well, that's usable for all. But perhaps the question, again, is just, why do you say is a source of energy for the poor? Thank you.
Thank you. There was a question there and also a comment. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much, panel. And that's been very informative. And I also try to restrict myself to 1 question. And I'm submitting to my brother, or to the panel, but focusing more to my brother, Mr. Kaira.
Sorry, are you able just to put the mic closer? We can hardly hear you.
Okay, my question is,
thank you.
Mr. Kaira, having been in the solar landscape for a while now, and you have some experiences, what is your judgment that without investing in local manufacturing to production capabilities in the solar solutions, do you see the sustainability and viability of solar solutions, which are important and continuously changing all the time, and with those costs that you continue to refer into that are pretty high? And maybe lastly, to figure out is that was just to link to the 300 biogas plants which you referred to. What was the total output that you estimate that would contribute?
Okay. So a question for Mr. Kaira and also for the biodigesters. Last question from Mr. Makaliki.
Thank you very much. My question is also on solar panels. In the presentation, we heard that the cost of the panels is coming down, and the figure that was given was 5 cents per kilowatt. Looking at statutory instrument number 32 of 2008, as well as statutory instrument number 89 of 2010, these items are zero rated in terms of duty and VAT. But we continue to see that the energy service providers and suppliers of these items still peg them at very high prices. Are you making super profits?
Thank you. I will take those 3 for now. Probably we can start with the last question. Are you making super profits? Especially that you have ably explained to the floor that you are now buying your panels at $0.5 US per watt from about $5 per watt 10 years ago. Mr. Kaira.
Okay. Yes, that's a perception question. From the consumer side, if you are an ordinary consumer and you'd like to buy solar solutions, when you approach a dealer, you'll be told if you need a power backup system, it's going to cost you 25,000 kwacha for it to be able to power your lights when you lose ZESCO power, and power your refrigerator, and you'll be able to watch a TV. Yes, the prices for these solutions remain high because the exchange rate has not helped us.
if you look at history, solar panels were costing $5 per watt in 2000. That price has fallen to sub-dollar today, but the exchange rate has done the opposite. In 2000, a dollar was 2 kwacha, but today you can see that a dollar is a little over 10 kwacha. So, and these things are imported. So when you import everything, you expect that the price will be high. So that's the explanation. We continue to import solar panels. All solar equipment is imported. So transport costs, freight costs, and all those added together will not help. And when you import, you're importing at the ruling exchange rate. So, matter of fact, most solar companies are not making super profits. If you take an interest to do a survey, you will agree with me that we are not making super profits. I hope I've attempted to answer your question. Coming to the question of local manufacturing, yes, if either government via ZDA or other government wings encouraged manufacturing of these solar panels, deep cycle batteries, and all the other things that go with them, we will be able to see a reduction in the costs of these solutions. And I think the solutions will be more affordable. That's my comment to that. I hope I've answered your question, Mr. Zimba. Coming to the question on the paradox, well, I did not mean that solar is meant for the poor in the sense that it's only the poor who need it. But the technology is appropriate for the poor who live in villages, and this technology is expensive. So if you look at it from that perspective, that statement is true, and it holds. However, I agree with you that you don't need to be poor to use solar. So there are people who use solar. As a matter of fact, solar in the developed world is very different from the way we do it here. Solar in the developed world is in the cities. It's not in the rural areas. There's very little of it in the rural areas in the developed world. But here, because we are accustomed to power that readily gives us, we always think we cannot use solar because it's only for lighting. And that's the perception we are trying to correct. So here in Zambia, awareness is quite low in terms of solar technology. We are beginning to see that most people are beginning to see the importance of solar now because of the power crisis we are going through. So a couple of years back, when we set up our solar company, people used to ask us questions. Are you even making money? Who needs this solar here? Those are questions people used to ask, and now people are coming back, coming to shake hands, say, you did the right thing, because we have a crisis and everyone else wants a solar solution. So I hope I answered that question. Thank you.
Okay, before we, Mr. Lungu attempts, just a minute before you attempt your last question. Maybe also just to add on to what Mr. Kaira's question he was attending to regarding super profits and things like that. You may be aware that when the issue of refit in Germany started some years back, when the panel prices were still on the high side, the tariff range, even in Germany, was in excess of 20 cents. So the decline has already reflected in the level of the tariff that most developers would be asking you for. So probably if you just also look at that, it shows you that there's already been some form of a decline. Because now, even in the world market, we've had tariffs that are reaching grid parity. The South African case, for example, We've heard something even in the US and things like that. But coupled with that is what has been also alluded to, that is the local manufacturing. That also has played a critical role in terms of the panels themselves, but also in terms of the other support structures that would go with the solar. So probably that is something also to consider as we look at the $5 per watt and the 0.5. But probably we can continue that a little bit later. Let me ask Mr. Lungu to give his views also.
Okay, thank you. What I said is that we're supposed to construct 3,375 biogas plants in 3 years. So that would translate to about 20 megawatts installed power. Other projects we have been trying to embark on is to use the Chunga or the Lusaka landfill, where all the waste from Lusaka can generate power and we input into the main grid. On that part, you can generate close to about 100 megawatts of power. So those are some of the possibilities. So by just installing one biogas plant, you can, like for example, the smallest one, you can be able to cook for about 4 hours. You can do lighting for about 6 to 8 hours. You can also run a small engine, for example, for 2 hours on 1 cubic of biogas. So I think to amplify more, it's about 20 megawatts of net power. Yes, sir.
Thank you. We'll take some more questions. May I allow those that have not asked to ask? We will come back to you later, sir. So probably you start with Mr. Mwandamina here. We have a mic in front here.
There's a question there.
Okay, so there's a hand and there's a question and also a mic in hand. So we'll start with you, sir, and then yes, we'll come in front here. So let's start with you, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Teddy Mwale. They're talking about alternative fuels, renewable energies there. The gentleman from Zambia Sugar talked about biofuels. I know that a few years ago, the blending ratios were agreed and with the stakeholders. Now, what was remaining was the issue of pricing, because I know biofuel is a very important component in the transport sector. I don't know what has happened to the issue of pricing of biofuels and how it can be commercialized. Maybe somebody, maybe not necessarily the panel, maybe somebody from ERB or government can just shed light on this. The next comment I would like to make is regards municipal waste, converting it to energy. Some of us have been trying to do this project for the past 5 years or so. Now, I don't know if the local government institutions are a better place to promote waste to energy, or should move this function to Minister of Energy or ERB or someone else, because we are sitting on a resource which can greatly contribute to the production of energy in this country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Even though there's light coming to my eyes, I think I can spot one Mr. Brian Mwanza from ERB, who I think can assist in answering that first question. So we'll take the second question, but Mr. Mwanza, probably you could just prepare an answer for us. We'll take the second question. Yes, sir.
Hello, test. Okay. Musa Kasonka Jr. Number one, I don't think it's completely right to say banks will not finance solar energy. I think apart from guns and drugs, banks are ready to talk to anyone with a viable project that is able to pay back. Now, I have a question for the solar presenter. Have you considered what's going on in Morocco in the Nur Desert, where solar is used to heat water, and the water that is heated produces electricity? Apparently, it is more efficient than solar energy. Then two, is the pungent smell related to production of electricity from bio?
Okay, so I suppose that was basically a question about CSP, concentrated solar. So probably you can comment on that one. And also, okay. So I'll take two questions, one there and one in front here.
Thank you very much. My name is Kefas Chow. My question is on the windmill technology. Are there any plans to venture into that? Because I think in Europe, when you look at Germany, for instance, they have really maximized on the windmill technology. What are your comments?
Okay, so probably we'll have our last question from Mr. Mandamina.
Okay, my question is basically on technology. I think, Mr. Kaila, you said that solar now is at a stage where it can be used as grid power. But I think from industrial use, for you to use it like that, you need to increase the load factor. And in order to do that, you need storage. And I want to know the development in the storage in terms of is the cost dropping, as was the case with the PV panels, and also has the technology actually improved to the extent where you can viably use it to run your productive ventures.
Thank you. So probably we'll start with Mr. Mwanza from ERB. You can give us an update on the pricing of biofuels, and maybe you can also attempt to answer the question about municipal waste, waste to energy. Who is better placed to handle it? Can we please have a mic? Mr. Mwanza, you can just, yes.
Thank you, moderator. As regards the pricing of biofuels, being essentially an infant industry, we haven't pegged or entered into the pricing of biofuels as we do for petroleum products, because the market is still young and would like to see the market develop before we can begin to regulate the price. The Ministry of Energy, through the Department of Energy, has been looking at mechanisms where they can issue tenders for the supply of biofuels to the government refinery so that it can be blended with the mineral petroleum. And in those contracts, that's where the pricing for those particular programs will be set. But in general terms, the prices that a private manufacturer can charge for the product really is dependent between the buyer and the supplier. And what we've noticed is that it significantly it's significantly influenced by the prices of the crude oil on the world market. Whenever the price of crude oil goes up, biofuels are seen as a favorable market. But ever since the price of crude oil dropped below $50 per barrel, we saw the interest in biofuels quickly depreciated, and that has been a challenge for now. As regards waste to energy, the better placed institutions that have been exploring that have been the municipalities or the councils. Lusaka City Council has been actively pursuing to develop a waste to energy project at their Chunga engineered site. But I think the modalities have not yet been concluded. They're looking for a partner to invest in that aspect. And perhaps just a comment, I heard one question relating to the smell from waste to energy or biomass or biogas production. Actually, when you do have biogas digesters, you actually reduce the smell, as opposed to if you are dealing with untreated municipal waste. What you will see if you live in Lusaka, around the garden compound area, that smell is not as significant as what you would get if you are at the Luwuto municipal area, because in Luwuto and Ndola, they have a biodigester as opposed to what you will get in garden compound by Lusaka Water and Storage Company. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you can also tackle the inquiry about wind the wind resource and what is happening in that front?
Well, with regards to wind, the institution that would give you a definitive position right now is the Department of Energy, because they have embarked on doing studies, an energy resource study, which will include a wind mapping component where they are trying to map the hotspots for wind within the country so that that information will become available to any investor who would want to go into wind production, because the cost of doing wind studies is very high. So if you have basic information, then you narrow the areas where investors can come and do more specific studies related to the particular projects they want to do. So the Department of Energy would give you better information on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Probably quickly we'll ask Mr. Kaira to...
Can I comment on biofuel?
Oh, yes, please.
So the biofuel question, the biofuel question for Zambia Sugar is fairly straightforward. You're looking at it independent of some of the pricings that have been described, but quite clearly what you're looking at is what's the price would I get for my molasses versus ethanol. And when you talk biofuels, we shouldn't restrict ourselves to just the sugar sources from sucrose. There's other starches and other products that will give you that biofuel. But as the gentleman just said in there, the link to crude oil is significant. As most people would know, our competitors on the world market, like Brazil, will switch from making sugar into crystal to ethanol, depending on what the crude oil price was doing. So there's another angle to it. With regards to the smell, the pungent smell is your hydrogen sulfide. In your anaerobic reaction, you're actually eating that up. So the bugs are feeding on that. That's why you don't have the smell. So that pungent smell you described is some offsets of what's coming from your process.
Thank you, Mr. Mpund. Now, Mr. Kaira, the question on CSP and also use of solar storage systems for grid stabilization and all that.
Okay, CSP, yes, you're right that CSP probably is one of the most efficient ways of conversion of thermal energy into electricity when you use solar. But attached to that, you're talking about financing, that banks don't shun RIE projects. Our general experience has been that because of the risks, naturally banks would like to minimize risks, but as developers would like to work hand in hand with the bank and share the risk. Probably that's one way that has made banks not very willing to do these RIE projects. That has been our experience. We've been to banks and we've been trying to do large-scale solar projects. But the experience has been lukewarm, such that we go into lengthy back and forth, and in the end, nothing happens. So yes, maybe if we considered CSP, we've not considered CSP. Well, just one on wind. Wind turbines are of two kinds. It's either wind to power a mechanical pump that will pump water, or wind to power a wind turbine that will generate electricity. Small wind turbines are viable in Zambia, and we're implementing in 5 sites in Southern Province for pumping water. So we generate electricity when the wind is blowing to pump water. That could be day or night, but during the day, we use solar to pump water, or we use solar to charge batteries that will pump water in the night. So there's that complementary aspect of the wind and solar to pump water. So that's what we're doing in Southern Province. So it is viable. It's just that these projects can only be funded by government at the moment. Private sector, like I said in the first place, the areas where these things are needed, economic activity is very low. So not so much penetration.
Storage for solar. Yes, solar can do what the hydro grid can do. It just depends on the levels of utilization. So if you set up an industry that requires 10 kilowatts, you can easily do that from a PV system, and it will fully function because you will have solar for collection, and then you have batteries for storage. When you begin to talk about megawatt size systems, you need huge storage systems. The reason why that's not happening in the developed world on a large scale is the cost. If you put up a 10 megawatt power plant using solar, the associated battery storage is even more expensive. So that's a challenge that's there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those questions. And also, sorry, sir, I've been given strict instructions by the Director of Programs. Thank you so much to the panelists, and also thank you so much for your attention. I'll now hand over to the Director of Programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our moderator, Mr. Mandamwale, Manager Renewable Energy, CEC. I think let's give them a big round of applause for tackling alternative energy solutions and investing renewable energy, the future for energy in Zambia and many other countries. Thank you so much. I now wish to call upon the Permanent Secretary, the Chair of the ZDA Board, Vice Chair, and the team to come up so that we can do the closing of this forum. We have tackled 3 topics. Climate change, is it a myth? And you were able to hear that climate change is real. It's affecting everybody in the villages, in the cities, and we need to find solutions to take care of our lives and investment in various sectors. We also looked at the rising demand for energy, what can be done. That was tackled. Very interesting and insightful topic there. And this is something and a conversation that can continue so that we actually do find solutions from the policy side and also from the consumers. What is it that you can do to reduce, on the load for using energy? We also just now listened to a conversation on alternative energy solutions, and that was ably handled. May I now hand over to the Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Kayula Siame, to come and officially close this forum.
The Honorable Raymond Mpundu, MP, Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Mrs. Mary Ngure, Board Chairperson, the Vice Chairperson of Zambia Development Agency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for the valuable contributions to this important forum that you have provided. A special thanks to the moderators and the panelists for making this investment forum very, very interactive. I'm very confident that this forum has brought about a much clearer understanding of the investment opportunities that exist in the energy sector in Zambia, and have also offered an excellent opportunity for networking between the local and the international players. I have no doubt that the expected output of this forum will result in increased investment flows and joint venture partnerships. You may wish to agree with me that the potential for strengthened investment and economic ties amongst African countries can be enhanced so as to contribute tremendously to the growth and development goals of the African continent. I wish to urge the local and foreign investors to take advantage of Zambia's favorable investment environment by choosing to invest in various sectors of the economy, but in particular the energy sector. There still exists a large energy gap, not only in Zambia, but also in the region. We have been informed that in Zambia alone, there is a shortfall of over 2,000 megawatts. This presents a big opportunity for private sectors to partner with government or indeed to undertake greenfield investment in electricity generation, petroleum, coal, and renewable energy projects. For instance, with effects of climate change leading to higher temperatures, an opportunity exists in which solar energy can also be harnessed. Issues of climate change discussed here this morning are a wake-up call for the private sector to take an aggressive role and invest in climate-resilient projects. As we heard from the discussions, funds for such projects usually go unutilized, hence the need to tap in and contribute to sustainable development while creating jobs in Africa and in Zambia as well. I would also like to take this opportunity to reassure the meeting that government is committed to providing a conducive business environment. And through the Zambia Development Agency, the government will continue to promote and facilitate investment, trade, and competitiveness to ensure that the private sector become the economic drivers of our economy. With these few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor and my privilege to officially close this important meeting. I thank you, and God bless.
Thank you very much, P.S. Kayula Siame. Thank you very much. And I just wish to thank our guest of honor, Mr. Raymond Mpundu, Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, who was standing in for the Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, Honorable Margaret Dudu Mwanakatwe. And of course, our board chair, Ms. Mary Ngube, Vice Chair Dan Stasi, directors from the ministry, and acting director, Mr. Simwawa, who is here representing Director General, Mr. Patrick Chisanga. It now remains for me to thank you for staying with us. It was an important occasion to discuss energy solutions and renewable energy, looking at the backdrop of climate change. Thank you all, and in particular, thank you to all those who are coming from different countries for joining us. Let's do this for our country. We can change our situation, but we need to move and take action. God bless you.